A kind man paid for a poor girl's meal. He had no idea she was a millionaire. Days later, fate brought them together in an unexpected way. Hello, viewer. Thanks for joining us. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the city you're watching from. Now let's continue with the story. Daniel Thompson stepped off the crowded Midtown bus and hurried toward his favorite corner cafe in Manhattan. It was 7:30 in the morning, a time when the streets hummed with people rushing to work. The crisp air carried hints of fresh coffee and city grit. Daniel, a tall man of 45, wore a well-worn grey blazer with scuffed elbows and carried a battered leather satchel stuffed with student essays. Though he held himself with quiet dignity, subtle signs of strain appeared in the slight furrow of his brow and the way he glanced anxiously at his watch. Inside the cafe, a chorus of voices blended with the hiss of the espresso machine. He waited in line behind a group of office workers and glanced around, feeling a familiar mixture of comfort and worry. Bills loomed in his mind: rent, utilities, and a mounting credit card balance. His salary as a literature professor at St. Albion University barely covered basic expenses in expensive Manhattan. Still, he found solace in small joys, like an affordable coffee and a moment of peace before his day of lectures. As Daniel finally reached the counter to place his usual order, his attention was drawn to a woman standing at the cash register beside him. She wore threadbare jeans, a faded coat several sizes too big, and had hair tied in a loose ponytail that had seen better days. Her posture suggested fatigue, as if she had been carrying too many burdens for too long. She spoke in a soft voice, requesting a simple meal, a cup of tea and a bagel. When the cashier ran her debit card, an apologetic beep sounded. The woman's cheeks flushed crimson as she glanced nervously around. "Could you try it again?" she asked, her voice trembling with embarrassment. The machine refused her request a second time, leaving her visibly flustered. Daniel was close enough to hear the exchange and noticed the shame flicker in her eyes. He observed her for a split second, the desperate effort to maintain composure, her quiet dignity as she promised she had funds somewhere. Instinctively, he reached into his wallet and produced his own card. "Let me take care of it," he said gently. The woman turned to him, startled, and he offered a polite nod. "You don't have to do that," she whispered, glancing at the floor, her tone more anxious than ungrateful. "I insist," Daniel replied, summoning a kind smile. "It's just a bagel and a cup of tea. I'd be happy to help." Though every penny mattered to him, a voice inside urged him to help her maintain her dignity. She was clearly embarrassed by her predicament, and he sensed a deep vulnerability in her posture. The cashier completed the transaction, handing over the bagel and steaming cup of tea. Daniel discreetly stepped back, giving her space to collect herself. He noticed the relief, and perhaps a trace of confusion, in her eyes. "Thank you," she said quietly. Her voice sounded measured, her words precise. She seemed more educated than her shabby clothes suggested. She paused for a moment, as if to say something else, but instead clutched the take-out bag and teacup and headed to a small table in the corner. Daniel wanted to ask if she was all right, but he felt uncertain about intruding further on her privacy. He took his own coffee and settled at a nearby table. As he skimmed through his students' essays, marked with scribbled notes about characterization and narrative technique, he couldn't stop glancing toward the woman. Occasionally, her eyes lifted, meeting his for a fraction of a second, then darting away. A swirl of questions formed in his mind. He wondered how she had come to be in such dire financial straits. Perhaps she had lost her job or suffered a medical setback. He had read too many stories of middle-class families sliding into hardship overnight. His thoughts drifted to the precarious nature of his own situation. Though he was employed, St. Albion University had been hinting at budget cuts for months. Rumors circulated that the humanities departments were first in line for restructuring. Daniel knew his position wasn't guaranteed. He finished his coffee and stacked his papers, preparing to leave for campus. Before he left, he glanced once more in the woman's direction. Her gaze shifted from the window to him, offering a small nod. He tried to return a reassuring smile. Then he walked out into the brisk air, his heart faintly lighter, even though a world of uncertainties awaited him. As he navigated the throng of pedestrians on the sidewalk, he couldn't shake off a lingering sense of responsibility. Part of him wished he could have done more, offered a resource, or asked if she needed help. But he also knew how delicate pride could be, how someone in need often had difficulty accepting anything beyond a small gesture. For now, that gesture would have to suffice. He turned the corner toward the subway station, unaware that his quiet act of compassion had started a chain of events neither he nor that mysterious woman could foresee. There was no sense of finality in his mind, only a gentle warmth that hinted he had done the right thing, even if it cost him more than he cared to admit. He walked on, ready to face another day of teaching, oblivious that destiny had begun weaving a complex tapestry around him and around her. Daniel arrived on campus to find a subdued restlessness hovering in the halls. The wide corridors of St. Albion University were lined with portraits of notable alumni, each one testifying to the institution's proud history. Yet that morning, whispers of uncertainty permeated the atmosphere. Colleagues in the humanities department exchanged worried glances, while junior staff members clustered in hushed conversations. He was on his way to his office when Lucy Parker, a fellow literature professor and dear friend, rushed up to him. Lucy, 40 years old, had kind brown eyes and an approachable demeanor that put most students at ease. Her typical bright smile was replaced by a look of genuine concern. "Daniel, have you seen the latest email from Dr. Bowman?" she asked quietly, pulling him aside. "He's calling for an emergency faculty meeting this afternoon. I heard it might be about budget cuts." Daniel's heart sank. "I haven't checked my inbox yet. Let's head there together." They made their way to the small faculty lounge, where a faded couch and a few mismatched chairs offered a modest refuge from the campus bustle. Lucy grabbed her laptop to open the email. The subject line read, "Urgent Departmental Reassessment Discussion Today, 3 p.m. She groaned softly and turned the screen toward him so he could read the contents. The message was terse, confirming that the university's Board of Trustees was evaluating each department's financial sustainability. All full-time faculty were required to attend. Anxiety flared in Daniel's chest. He exchanged a glance with Lucy, who seemed equally unsettled. "Looks like the rumors are true," Daniel said, rubbing his temples. "They've been circling around for months, but I didn't think it would happen so quickly." Lucy let out a nervous breath. "They'll probably start trimming anything that's not profitable. And you know how they see the humanities, more like a passion project than a revenue generator." A group of professors filed into the lounge, each sporting an expression that ranged from deep worry to outright dread. Jennifer Moore from the History of Art department, a poised woman in her early 50s, spoke in a trembling voice about how her classes had already been reduced in size and scope. Robert Henderson, who taught sociology, added that he had lost 2 promising teaching assistants the previous semester due to budget constraints. Daniel found himself staring at the pattern of cracks on the lounge's ceiling, recalling the pleas from his sister Susan about sending financial help to their aging mother. He had promised to do what he could, even though his own finances were a tightrope walk. Now, the possibility of a job loss loomed over him like a dark cloud. His thoughts drifted to the woman in the cafe. He remembered her weary eyes and how he had paid for her meal. He felt a pang of guilt, knowing he was barely able to handle his own expenses, yet also an odd sense of purpose. Her quiet gratitude reminded him why he had chosen this career in the first place. Teaching literature wasn't just a job, it was a calling. He wanted to inspire people, to show them the world through stories and words, but all that might be swept away if the department closed or downsized him into oblivion. Lucy shut her laptop and gave his arm a reassuring squeeze. "We'll see what happens at the meeting. Let's try not to panic until we have all the facts." He nodded, attempting a smile. "We should keep our spirits up. Maybe they'll just reorganize a few things or shift budgets around. We can still hope." Even as he said it, Daniel felt his optimism waver. A part of him recognized that administrative decisions could be brutal, especially when guided by finances alone. The hours leading up to the afternoon meeting crept by painfully. Daniel's literature class that morning took on a somber mood as students picked up on his unease. He encouraged them to discuss the themes of sacrifice and hope in their reading assignment, but his voice had a subdued edge. Near lunchtime, Dr. Charles Bowman, the interim director of the literature department, sent out another reminder about the meeting. Bowman's email tone was neutral but terse, implying that significant changes were afoot. Daniel spent most of the lunch break in his office, scanning job listings online, something he hadn't done in years. Each listing he saw offered meager pay or required qualifications outside his expertise. When 3 o'clock finally came, the faculty gathered in a large conference room. The chatter died down as Dr. Bowman took the podium, adjusting his glasses with a nervous tremor. Daniel took a seat beside Lucy, bracing himself for whatever news was coming next. The weight of uncertainty pressed down on everyone present. The emergency faculty meeting ended with more questions than answers. Dr. Bowman had announced that the board was indeed reviewing cost-cutting measures, and while no final decisions had been made, the literature department was considered non-essential compared to more lucrative fields. The phrase stung like a slap. Daniel left the conference room feeling hollow, haunted by the unspoken threat of unemployment. Afterward, he found refuge in his small, cramped office. Stacks of poetry anthologies, literary journals, and reference books lined every wall. He normally took pride in this coziness, but now it felt like a fortress on the brink of collapse. Lucy stopped by on her way out, offering a half-hearted smile. "We just have to stay calm," she said, leaning against his doorframe. "Once we have real data, we can argue our case. Maybe the board will listen." Daniel nodded, though doubt filled his expression. "I guess," he murmured. "They want departments to be cost-effective, and we don't bring in big donations or corporate sponsorships. Literature doesn't have the flashy appeal of a new tech lab." Lucy sighed, a mixture of sympathy and frustration. "Try to rest. We'll regroup tomorrow." She left with a comforting pat on his shoulder. Alone, Daniel slumped into his chair. He stared at the photograph on his desk, a snapshot taken years ago during happier times. He was standing beside his father, both holding battered copies of Dickens novels. His father had been a high school English teacher with an infectious passion for the written word. That memory sparked guilt in Daniel for even considering the possibility of giving up on teaching. This profession was more than a paycheck. It was supposed to be a calling, a legacy he cherished, but practical worries now encroached on that sense of purpose. He thought about the divorce that had fractured his personal life 5 years prior. Melissa, his ex-wife, had grown weary of tight budgets and Daniel's obsession with books and lesson plans. She had yearned for a life of stability he couldn't provide, and eventually the distance between them became insurmountable. The memory weighed on him, a reminder of how easily one could lose everything when finances fell apart. He unlocked the bottom drawer of his desk, pulling out a spreadsheet of monthly bills. It was a grim list: rent, student loan payments from his own graduate studies, credit card debt, and a modest allowance he sent to his mother's care facility. He tapped the pen against the page, feeling the weight of each unpaid balance. A wave of insecurity washed over him, intensifying the loneliness that always hovered at the edges of his daily routine. Outside his office window, the late afternoon sky offered a view of the campus courtyard, with students chatting and hurrying to their next class. He wondered how many were truly aware of the precarious situation their beloved humanities programs were in. A pang of responsibility stabbed at his conscience. He wanted to protect these students' right to learn about Shakespeare, Morrison, and Wordsworth. His desk phone rang, pulling him from his thoughts. It was Susan, his older sister, calling from her home upstate. He mustered a lighter tone, trying not to alarm her. "Hey, sis," he said. "Everything okay?" "Just checking on you," she replied, voice tense. "Mum's medical bills went up again." "I wanted to make sure we were still on track to handle that." Daniel rubbed his eyes. "I'm doing my best. I'm waiting to see if I might have to take on additional work, but—" His voice trailed off, unwilling to dive into the new uncertainties. Susan, sensing his hesitation, grew silent. "You sure you're all right?" He forced a small laugh. "Sure. Just a hectic day at the university. They might restructure some things." "Nothing set in stone yet." She cleared her throat, trying to sound optimistic. "Maybe it won't be so bad. You've weathered plenty of storms. I believe in you." Her words offered a flicker of comfort. After they hung up, Daniel set the phone down, wishing he could share Susan's hope. Instead, he felt trapped between his loyalty to the department and the harsh reality that he might soon be out of work. His mind wandered once again to the woman in the cafe. She had looked so helpless, yet so composed. He related, in a way. They both appeared to be standing on uncertain ground. Only her situation seemed far worse, or so he assumed. He massaged the back of his neck and turned his attention to the stack of student essays. The familiar comfort of analyzing literature called to him. If everything else slipped away, he wanted to remain true to his passion, at least for the time being. He began marking the papers, each red pen stroke reflecting the quiet determination that refused to let him quit just yet. Daniel woke early the next day, mind already buzzing with worry. Manhattan's skyline shimmered beyond his apartment window, but he hardly noticed its beauty. He gathered his lecture notes, drank a quick cup of coffee, and hurried out into the streets. Each step toward the university felt like a march into the unknown. In the hallway near his office, Lucy waited with a stack of proposals. Her expression was tense. "I spent half the night brainstorming ways to justify our department," she said in a hushed tone. "If we can show the board some innovative projects, creative writing workshops, public lectures, maybe partnerships with local businesses, it might help." Daniel scanned the pages. Lucy had outlined various collaborations and potential revenue streams. He gave a thoughtful nod. "This looks promising, but will it be enough to convince them we're not just a financial drain?" Lucy's eyes flickered with determination. "We have to try. Maybe we can pitch the idea that humanities teach critical thinking, which is essential for any career path. The board needs to see that we serve a broader educational purpose." Daniel admired Lucy's dedication. He recalled how, just months ago, they'd been excited about new poetry seminars and student publications. Now, their focus had shifted to survival tactics. A hint of resentment stirred in him, resenting the culture that placed profits over intellectual enrichment. He headed to his classroom, where he found Rachel Stevenson, a 19-year-old student with an unquenchable thirst for literature. She waited by the doorway, fiddling with a worn notebook. "Professor Thompson," she said softly, "I've been hearing rumors about cuts. Is it true?" Will there still be a literature program next semester? He offered a reassuring smile, though it felt forced. We're fighting to make sure it continues. Try not to worry. Focus on your studies, okay? Her eyes shone with anxiety. Literature is the reason I chose to attend St. Albion. I can't imagine the school without it. Daniel patted her arm gently. Neither can I. He started the lecture, discussing how authors across different eras navigated societal pressures. His voice gained steadiness as he delved into the works of great storytellers who had faced censorship or financial hardships. The students listened intently, but Daniel sensed a new tension in the air. Even the younger ones felt the undercurrent of looming change. After class, he returned to his office. He intended to finalize notes for a possible proposal to the board, yet his concentration waned. His phone buzzed with a text from Lucy. Emergency meeting at noon, room 204. Be there. The cryptic message tightened the knot in his stomach. In the meeting, Lucy and two other colleagues discussed a potential approach to the new board president, whose identity had been revealed only recently. The new president, Isabella Winters, was rumored to be a philanthropic entrepreneur with a background in real estate. Word around campus was that she had modern ideas about running the institution, focusing on profitability and community outreach. Some believed she might have a soft spot for cultural programs, while others insisted she was strictly business. Daniel rubbed his chin thoughtfully. We need to present our department's achievements as beneficial for the university's reputation. Stories of successful alumni who studied literature could help. Maybe we can gather testimonials. Jennifer Moore suggested highlighting the job market adaptability of literature graduates. Robert Henderson volunteered to compile data on how reading comprehension and writing skills improved overall academic performance. They all agreed to gather this information quickly. However, an uneasy feeling nagged at Daniel. The mention of profitability clashed with his core belief that education shouldn't be measured solely in dollars and cents. His conscience stirred with the question, was it right to market literature merely as a stepping stone to success, rather than a source of personal and cultural enrichment? He wrestled with this internal conflict as they concluded the meeting. Practicality demanded that he adapt to the board's mindset, at least if he wanted to protect the department. Yet every fiber of his being resisted reducing literature to a set of marketable skills. Back in his office, Daniel gazed at the spines of classic novels lining his shelves, recalling how these works spoke to the human spirit. A memory surfaced of his father reading him passages from Tolstoy's War and Peace during a snowstorm, a flashlight illuminating the words. That memory stood for everything he cherished about teaching. He sensed that if he allowed the purely financial angle to dominate, he risked losing the very essence of why he taught. His thoughts turned briefly to the stranger at the cafe. He wondered if she had a place to sleep, or if she too was grappling with moral crossroads. It struck him that compassion in the face of adversity formed the backbone of human existence. He resolved to stand up for his beliefs, even if compromise became necessary. He placed Lucy's proposals atop his own notes, determined to refine them for the next possible audience, perhaps Isabella Winters, the new board president. A sense of urgency and conviction coursed through him, though he remained cautious about what lay ahead. His goal was clear: protect the department, protect his students' future, and retain his own sense of integrity in a rapidly shifting landscape. By the end of the week, the tension across campus was palpable. Students picked up on the faculty's anxiety, and rumors ran rampant. Some said entire departments would vanish overnight, while others claimed the new president planned to turn St. Albion into a research powerhouse. Daniel found these speculations only heightened his own apprehension. Late Friday afternoon, A faculty-wide announcement confirmed that Isabella Winters herself would be touring each department soon. She wanted direct input from professors before presenting her recommendations to the board. The message included a date for when she'd visit the literature department. "Next Wednesday," Lucy said, reading the email on her phone in Daniel's office. "That's when we get our shot," Daniel nodded. "We need to prepare. Let's gather everything we've discussed. Maybe we can show her the value of our classes. Let her see the passion of our students firsthand." A flash of hope lit Lucy's eyes. "I hear she's been sympathetic to the arts in the past, but you never know. People change once they're in power." Daniel tapped a pen against his desk. "Still, it's better than a silent board. At least we can plead our case directly." For the remainder of the day, he worked tirelessly with colleagues to assemble success stories and program outlines. They compiled testimonial letters from alumni, scanned local news clippings praising student-run literary events, and drafted proposals for future collaborations. Each document seemed like a small piece of armor against the looming threat of budget cuts. On Saturday morning, Daniel decided to treat himself to a walk through Central Park. Crisp autumn air greeted him as he strolled among the trees. Orange and gold leaves drifted gently to the ground, reminding him that change could be beautiful as well as daunting. He found a quiet bench, sat down, and tried to think about something other than administrative battles and potential unemployment. He couldn't help recalling the mysterious woman from the cafe. Her eyes had held a quiet resilience despite her tattered appearance. He wondered where she might be now, whether she'd found a warm place to sleep or someone else to help her. The memory stirred a desire in him to do more than just preserve his job. He wanted to stand up for basic kindness in a world that seemed increasingly cold. By Monday, a wave of hurried activity swept through the literature department. Lucy crafted a presentation filled with graphs showing how reading and analytical skills contributed to higher overall academic performance. Jennifer Moore helped incorporate data from other liberal arts faculties, illustrating the importance of interdisciplinary thinking. Robert Henderson pitched in with sociological perspectives, linking literature studies to empathy and community awareness. Daniel found himself editing a portion of their combined report, focusing on the intangible benefits of literature, how it fosters personal growth, emotional intelligence, and cultural understanding. Part of him worried that these points sounded too abstract to impress a board concerned with profits, yet he insisted they remain, trusting that Isabella Winters might recognize the intangible magic that books can bring to people's lives. On Tuesday afternoon, as they put the final touches on the materials, Lucy hesitated. "Daniel," she began carefully, "do you think we should leave out the personal anecdotes and just stick to the hard data? I'm afraid we might come off as too sentimental." He paused, remembering how stories had shaped his entire reason for teaching. "Facts and figures matter, Lucy, but if we don't show real human impact, we might as well be a marketing department." "Let's keep it balanced," she nodded, tension visible in her eyes. "All right, we'll include both." Before leaving for the day, Daniel stepped into Dr. Bowman's office. The interim director was a tall man in his mid-50s with thinning hair and a tired expression. Stacks of administrative papers covered his desk. "Daniel," Bowman greeted in a weary tone, "I'm expecting Ms. Winters's visit to be quite revealing." "She's known for her directness." Daniel fiddled with the edge of his shirt sleeve. "I just hope we can show her that cutting literature would harm the university's soul." Bowman pursed his lips. "We'll see. Good luck, Thompson. We'll all need it." As Daniel headed home, he felt an odd mixture of dread and optimism. The next day would be a turning point. Whether he could sway Isabella Winters or not, he was determined to be honest, to defend the department's worth, and to fight for the students who valued the written word as much as he did. That evening, He sat by his small kitchen table, sipping tea as the city lights gleamed through his window. He thought about the significance of Wednesday's meeting. In essence, it represented a step into the unknown, one that could redefine his career, his financial stability, and perhaps even the course of his life. He smoothed the pages of the presentation, feeling the weight of each possibility. A faint flicker of courage sparked within him, fueled by the same determination that had led him to help a stranger in need. He settled into bed, mind whirling with what-ifs, bracing himself for whatever came next. Wednesday arrived with a sense of anticipation that pulsed through the corridors of St. Albion University. Daniel woke before dawn, unable to sleep, and paced his modest apartment, double-checking the proposal materials he and Lucy had compiled. By 7:30, he was already on campus, sipping lukewarm coffee in the faculty lounge while scanning a binder filled with statistics, testimonials, and future program ideas. Lucy joined him shortly, offering a tight-lipped smile that reflected their shared nerves. "Are we really ready to show all this to Ms. Winters?" Lucy asked, taking a seat across from him. She looked over the binder's printed pages. "As ready as we'll ever be," Daniel replied, though the flutter in his chest betrayed his calm tone. "We can only hope she listens." The clock struck 9 when a small entourage entered the literature department's hallway. At the forefront was a tall woman with impeccable posture, wearing a tailored navy suit and low heels, Isabella Winters. Daniel recognized her at once, though she looked entirely different from the person he had helped at the cafe. Gone were the threadbare clothes and weary eyes. Her demeanor now was confident, though still tinged with reserve. He felt his stomach flip. Until that moment, he'd secretly wondered if he had only imagined her resemblance to the woman in need. But there she was, precisely the same person, yet worlds apart from the figure who'd stood helpless at a cash register. She made her way through the corridor with 2 assistants trailing behind, acknowledging each introduction with a poised nod. Dr. Charles Bowman greeted her outside his office, guiding her toward the faculty lounge where Daniel, Lucy, Jennifer Moore, and Robert Henderson waited. As Isabella walked in, Daniel sensed her gaze flick in his direction. It was a subtle moment, no dramatic flourish, merely the faintest hint of recognition. She spoke in a clear, measured tone. "Good morning. Thank you for assembling these materials. I'm looking forward to hearing your ideas about the literature department's place at St. Albion." Bowman gestured for everyone to sit, and Lucy began presenting their compiled data. Charts showed enrollment numbers, success stories, and the positive outcomes of cross-departmental collaborations. Robert chimed in about how literature courses improved students' analytical thinking across all majors. Jennifer spoke passionately about the broader cultural impact, referencing famous alumni who once sat in these very classrooms. Through it all, Isabella listened intently, interjecting occasionally with clarifying questions. Daniel noticed that, despite her polished appearance, Isabella's interactions with the faculty carried warmth. Her eyes lit up when Lucy described extracurricular workshops where students analyzed modern poetry. She showed a genuine interest when Jennifer mentioned a joint project with the local public library. At times, Daniel felt her gaze land on him, as though they shared a secret. He worked hard to maintain his composure, determined to focus on the departmental crisis rather than the curious circumstances of their first meeting. After nearly an hour, Isabella asked if anyone else wanted to add closing remarks. Daniel spoke up, his voice only slightly unsteady. "We believe the humanities, especially literature, serve as the backbone of critical thinking. Our department may not bring in massive grants, but it enriches the student experience in ways that can't always be measured in a spreadsheet. It's about empathy, creativity, and the power of words to change lives." A flicker of approval crossed Isabella's features. She nodded and thanked them for the thorough presentation. Then, in a calm but direct manner, she posed a question that hung in the air. If you had to restructure your department to better fit within the university's financial constraints, what would be your priority? The group glanced at one another. Lucy finally replied, "We'd focus on the programs that have a track record of drawing broader audiences, like public literary events, writing workshops sponsored by local businesses, and perhaps an online component to attract more students from outside the region." Isabella tapped a pen against her notepad. "That sounds feasible. I'll be discussing all of this with the rest of the board members, including Mr. Doyle. There will be a formal vote, likely within the next month. In the meantime, I encourage you to keep innovating. Show us how St. Albion's literature department can be both intellectually vibrant and financially sustainable." With that, the meeting ended. Bowman shook her hand and escorted her out. As she departed, her gaze met Daniel's for a fleeting second. She offered a polite but knowing smile, as if to acknowledge a connection that neither had admitted openly. His heart beat faster, torn between the fear of losing his job and the shock of seeing her in such a powerful position. He found himself wondering why she hadn't given any hint of recognition during the meeting. Was it merely professional etiquette? Or did she not want their chance encounter to overshadow the real business at hand? The question lingered in his mind, mingling with a glimmer of hope that her empathy might align with his department's future. He stood in the hallway, holding the binder against his chest, contemplating the peculiar role this woman might play in his life, and in the fate of the literature department at St. Albion. The weekend after Isabella's visit brought a swirl of tension and cautious optimism. Daniel spent Saturday sifting through his students' midterm essays, trying to keep his mind off the uncertain future. He wrestled with a question that had been gnawing at him since the meeting. Should he pursue a more stable career path if the literature department shut down? Susan, his sister, called that evening from upstate. "How did it go with the new board president?" she asked, concern lacing her voice. Daniel gave a low chuckle, though his mood was far from light. "Hard to say. She seemed open-minded, but there's still a strong push to cut what doesn't generate profit. And that might include us." Susan sighed on the other end. "Well, no matter what happens, just know we'll figure things out. You've always managed to land on your feet." Her confidence in him helped ease the knot of dread in his stomach, but he recognized that his personal finances were hanging by a thread. That thread could snap if the board decided to dismantle the department. He recalled the spreadsheets he'd updated the night before, monthly payments for his modest apartment, medical costs for their mother's care facility, and the lingering debt from his graduate school loans. Anxious thoughts nagged at him. Perhaps it was time to look for other options, yet every time that notion crossed his mind, he felt a profound sadness. Teaching literature was more than a job. It was the closest thing he had to a life's purpose, a way to connect with students and open their eyes to the richness of language and storytelling. On Sunday morning, he ventured to the bustling cafe in Midtown, the same one where he had first encountered Isabella in her disguise. This time, the place was packed with tourists and locals. He navigated through the line, recalling the moment she had stood there, card declined, eyes pleading but dignified. He asked himself how someone with such apparent wealth and influence had ended up in that situation. The puzzle left him both curious and uneasy. He ordered a plain coffee and sat down at a small table near the window, flipping open a well-worn copy of a Tolstoy novel. The sounds of chatter and clinking mugs surrounded him, and he found his mind drifting to the events of the past week. Every so often, the door opened with a gust of cool air, and he'd glance up, half expecting to see Isabella. She never appeared, and he eventually left, feeling the weight of unresolved questions. Monday arrived, signaling a return to campus and its swirl of responsibilities. Lucy caught up with him in the hallway before their morning classes. "We need to finalize our proposals for Dr. Bowman," she said, her tone brisk. "He wants a concrete plan for how we can host more revenue-generating events, maybe a series of public lectures in partnership with the local library, or an annual book fair that brings in sponsors." Daniel nodded, forcing a measure of enthusiasm. "Let's do it. We can't just hope for the best. We have to show we're taking steps to adapt. Maybe that'll convince Ms. Winters and the board to keep us funded." Lucy sighed, adjusting the strap of her tote bag. "You're right. I just can't believe we're having to jump through all these hoops for something as foundational as literature." They worked late into the evening in Daniel's office, surrounded by stacks of books and half-finished lesson plans. Jennifer and Robert joined them briefly to offer their suggestions. By the time they packed up, it was nearly 10 o'clock. Lucy left, promising to draft an outline for the proposed event series, while Daniel stayed behind to tidy up. Alone, he felt a sudden pang of restlessness. His once familiar routine, teaching classes, grading papers, exploring literary analyses, had given way to administrative strategizing. He realized that he was at a crossroads. If the department closed, perhaps he should move to a smaller city where costs were more manageable, or switch industries altogether, though the thought left him cold. Before locking his office, he glanced at a framed picture of his father on the desk, that same Dickens novel in his hands. It served as a gentle reminder of why he had committed himself to this path. He tried to imagine his father's voice, urging him to persevere in the face of adversity. He walked out of the building, his footsteps echoing in the silent corridor. The crisp night air hit his face, and he felt a faint resolve stir within him. He wouldn't give up on teaching, at least not without a fight. If that meant stepping outside his comfort zone, so be it. Tomorrow, he planned to ask Dr. Bowman if he could speak directly to Miss Winters about a potential new project. It was a small step, but a crucial one, towards securing the future of the literature department, and perhaps discovering more about the enigmatic woman whose presence lingered in his thoughts. Tuesday morning dawned with a sharp wind sweeping through the campus's stone arches. Daniel arrived early for a meeting Dr. Bowman had scheduled with several deans from other departments. The gathering took place in a sleek conference room on the top floor of the administration building, a stark contrast to the cozy, book-lined halls he was used to. Everything here was glass and steel, a modern aesthetic that hinted at the university's push for a more business-oriented approach. Bowman greeted Daniel with a brisk nod. "Glad you're here. We'll be discussing the broader structural changes the board wants to implement, so keep an open mind. They're big on synergy across departments." Daniel offered a polite smile, though inwardly he braced himself for a flood of corporate jargon. He found a seat near the window, which overlooked the sprawling campus quad. Gradually, the room filled with deans and representatives from various faculties, business, engineering, computer science, and others deemed high profile in the current academic climate. Once everyone was settled, a university vice president stood at the head of the long table, projecting slides onto a pristine white screen. Charts depicted enrollment trends, highlighting a surge in technology majors and a stagnation or decline in arts and humanities programs. The vice president spoke in clipped tones about consolidation and resource optimization. Daniel's stomach sank at each phrase. In his mind, he pictured the faces of students like Rachel Stevenson, whose intellectual curiosity thrived on literature. Would these intangible benefits vanish under the harsh light of profit-driven decision-making? Partway through the presentation, Dr. Bowman made a statement about the literature department's willingness to explore cross-disciplinary courses. Daniel nodded in agreement, though part of him felt uneasy about watering down the curriculum. Still, He understood the reality of the situation. They needed to prove relevance in a fast-changing educational landscape. A few seats down, the Dean of Business Studies proposed a joint course on business writing and communication, which could be co-taught by faculty from literature and business. Daniel perked up, seeing at least a partial solution. He scribbled notes, thinking of how they could incorporate rhetorical analysis, writing clarity, and the study of classic business documents. It wasn't purely literature, but it might bridge the gap and keep the department alive. By the meeting's end, Daniel was both exhausted and somewhat encouraged. They had at least found potential collaborators. Standing near the doorway, he chatted briefly with Dr. Elaine Carter, the Dean of Business Studies, about the next steps. She seemed open to involving his department, intrigued by the idea of introducing classic persuasive writing into her curriculum. A fleeting sense of hope sparked in Daniel, though overshadowed by the knowledge that everything depended on budget allocation still to be decided. Afterward, Dr. Bowman pulled Daniel aside in the corridor. "Good work in there," he said, lowering his voice. "I'm scheduling a follow-up with Ms. Winters and some board members in 2 weeks. We'll need a formal plan for these cross-department courses. Are you up for drafting it?" Daniel nodded, pulse quickening. "Absolutely. Just let me know what deadlines you have in mind." Bowman gave a tight smile. "I'll email you details. And we might need your personal touch to persuade Ms. Winters. She seemed quite receptive during her departmental visit." A curious pang flickered in Daniel's chest at Bowman's words. He hadn't shared the cafe story with anyone, but he sensed that Bowman had noticed Isabella's level of interest in their presentation. Stepping into the elevator, he wondered if he'd actually get a one-on-one conversation with her. The idea both intrigued and unsettled him. He arrived at his office to find Lucy waiting with a stack of flyers for a public reading event they'd organized. "We're holding a poetry and short story recital next week," she explained, setting the flyers on his desk. "We've invited local writers and some of our students to participate. If we get a decent turnout, it'll help show the community engagement side of literature." Daniel scanned the flyer. It featured simple but striking artwork and promised an evening of literary celebration. "This is good, Lucy," he said, nodding appreciatively. "It might also demonstrate that we're willing to reach beyond the traditional classroom format." She exhaled, relief in her eyes. "Let's hope so. We need every advantage we can muster. Maybe Mrs. Winters will hear about it." He considered the possibility, recalling the moment Isabella had smiled at him with quiet acknowledgement. "If she does, I hope she sees how dedicated we are to making literature accessible and beneficial for everyone." They spent the rest of the afternoon finalizing details for the event, booking a small auditorium, confirming participants, and planning a modest reception. Even as Daniel worked through the logistics, the sense of stepping into an unfamiliar realm persisted. He was now juggling tasks that felt akin to public relations or marketing, a far cry from the intimate lecture halls and well-thumbed novels that once defined his daily life. The stakes had never felt higher, and he knew that a single misstep could endanger the very existence of the department he loved. Still, a cautious optimism guided him. If stepping into this special world of high-stakes decisions and cross-department alliances meant saving the study of literature at St. Albion, he would do it. He closed his eyes for a brief moment, picturing the solemn vow he'd made to himself. He wouldn't give up, no matter how daunting the path became. Over the following days, Daniel immersed himself in the practicalities of collaborating with other departments. He spent hours exchanging emails with Dr. Carter from Business Studies, hammering out a trial syllabus that intertwined literary analysis with case studies on corporate communication. To his surprise, their correspondence flowed smoothly. She was enthusiastic about drawing from classic texts to illustrate timeless principles of persuasion, and he appreciated her willingness to adapt to a more literary viewpoint. Meanwhile, Lucy was deep in preparations for the upcoming public recital. She had recruited several undergraduates, including Rachel Stevenson, to recite original poems and excerpts from renowned authors. Posters appeared around campus and even in nearby coffee shops. A small buzz began to form, especially among students who appreciated the chance to perform and connect with the community. Daniel also received a handful of emails from alumni who had caught wind of the event. Some planned to attend in support, reminiscing about how St. Albion's literature department shaped their paths. These messages brought him renewed energy, confirming that their work held genuine value far beyond the immediate campus boundaries. Amid these positive strides, he found himself occasionally pausing to think about Isabella Winters. She hadn't returned to the literature department since the initial visit, yet her presence lingered in the background. Dr. Bowman hinted that she was making rounds across the university and gathering data from multiple sources before any decisions were finalized. Daniel wondered if she might appear unannounced at the recital, or if she would remain a distant decision-maker. One late afternoon, as Daniel left his office to grab a snack from a nearby vending machine, he spotted Robert Henderson hovering in the corridor with a somber look. "Everything okay?" Daniel asked, pressing the button for a bottled water. Robert shrugged, crossing his arms. "Got an email from the board's budget committee. Sociology is also on shaky ground. They're not shutting us down yet, but we need to prove our relevance too." Daniel handed him the water bottle. "Sounds like we're all under the microscope." Robert accepted it with a grim nod. "It's frustrating. The data might show lower enrollment, but these courses build empathy, cultural awareness, things you can't just replace with spreadsheets." Daniel offered a commiserating half-smile. "We'll keep proving our worth. Hang in there." Despite the worry, small rays of solidarity emerged. Jennifer Moore, from Art History, reached out to Daniel about co-hosting a panel on the connections between visual art and literary themes in the Renaissance. She believed a cross-pollination of fields could win favor with the administration. Daniel agreed to help organize it, seeing yet another avenue to demonstrate that literature wasn't an isolated discipline. That week, Daniel also took notice of a new presence on campus, a handful of business-suited individuals who roamed the halls in small groups, carrying tablets and taking notes. Rumor had it they were consultants hired by the university to assess departmental efficiency. Their guarded expressions and preference for quiet observation unsettled many faculty members. Some insisted these consultants were there to cut costs further. Others speculated they might compile unbiased reports for the board. During one of his lectures, Daniel spotted a consultant slipping in quietly at the back of the room. It was a tall man in his early 50s, with salt and pepper hair and a stern gaze. He watched Daniel's discussion on Shakespeare's handling of human ambition, scribbling on a notepad. Though the consultant never asked a question, Daniel felt the weight of his presence. When class ended, the man was gone, leaving only a slight tension in the air. That evening, Lucy confided her own anxiety about the consultants. "They scare me," she admitted as they walked out of the main building together. "It's like they're collecting data to use against us." "I can't help feeling paranoid," Daniel empathized. "I'm trying to see it as a chance to show them real teaching in action, but it's hard not to worry. We just need to stay focused on what we do best and hope that truth shines through." As they crossed the campus lawn, golden sunlight slanted through the trees. A group of students sat on the grass, discussing an upcoming paper. Another cluster rehearsed lines from a modern play for a drama elective. The sight reminded Daniel of why he continued to fight for these programs, the intangible moments of connection, creativity, and transformation that no spreadsheet could ever fully capture. He and Lucy parted ways near the library, each heading home to continue working on proposals or lesson plans. Daniel's mind lingered on the idea of forging alliances with other departments, bridging the gap between humanities and more technical fields. He acknowledged that this new environment demanded more than just passion. It required innovation and strategic thinking. He also couldn't shake the memory of Isabella's steady gaze. Part of him wondered whether she had intentionally concealed her identity in that cafe, testing the kindness of strangers, or if her reasons were more complex. Whichever the case, a faint sense of connection spurred him on, planting in him an unspoken confidence. If she had recognized something worthwhile in his department, perhaps in him, maybe there was hope after all. The day of the public recital arrived, bringing a wave of frantic last-minute preparations. Lucy coordinated with campus facilities to set up rows of chairs in a medium-sized auditorium, while Jennifer Moore volunteered to design a simple stage backdrop. Robert provided a microphone and speaker system borrowed from the sociology department, ensuring they had adequate sound equipment. Students bustled in and out, rehearsing lines and lugging boxes of programs. Rachel Stevenson seemed particularly excited, clutching a slim folder of her own poems. She approached Daniel with wide eyes. "Professor Thompson, do you think it's too personal if I read the one about my grandmother's illness?" she asked, voice trembling with nerves. Daniel gave her a warm smile. "I think your honesty is what makes your writing powerful. If you feel comfortable sharing it, the audience will appreciate your sincerity." She nodded, exhaling shakily. "Okay, I'll do it, then." As evening descended, the auditorium filled more than anyone had anticipated. Students arrived in groups. Some alumni showed up with nostalgic smiles, and a handful of local writers came to perform or simply watch. The hum of chatter and the rustle of programs created an atmosphere of excitement. Daniel spotted Dr. Carter from the business department, and even a few professors from engineering. Their presence signaled budding cross-campus support. Lucy served as the evening's MC. She welcomed everyone, highlighting the importance of literature in fostering empathy and self-expression. Then the performances began. A sophomore read a short story about her family's journey from another country, drawing murmurs of appreciation. A local poet performed a stirring piece on urban isolation. Rachel, her hands shaking slightly, delivered her poem about her grandmother's illness, drawing tears and gentle applause from the crowd. At one point, Daniel stepped onto the stage to read an excerpt from a classic short story, weaving in commentary about how such narratives bridge cultural divides. He caught sight of Lucy near the wings, her face shining with pride. This was exactly the kind of community engagement they'd hoped to showcase. Midway through the event, a subtle commotion at the back of the auditorium made Daniel pause. Standing there, almost unnoticed, was Isabella Winters. She wore a simple black coat and stood alone, hands clasped in front of her. Daniel's heart thudded. He hadn't expected her to come. He resumed his reading, trying not to let his surprise slip into his voice. When he finished, the audience applauded, and Lucy invited a few more readers to the stage. Daniel slipped away to stand by the side exit. From there, he could see Isabella more clearly. She watched each performance with rapt attention, occasionally tilting her head as though weighing every word. The way her gaze flickered from performer to performer reminded Daniel of their first encounter, when she had studied him with quiet curiosity. Once the performances ended, Lucy thanked the audience, encouraging them to mingle in the lobby where refreshments awaited. People filed out in small clusters. Isabella lingered near the seats, as though not wanting to interrupt the crowd. Daniel, steadying his breath, approached her. "Thank you for coming, Ms. Winters," he said, voice low to maintain some privacy amid the bustling foyer. She turned, a warm but composed smile lighting her face. I'd heard about this event from a couple of students. I wanted to see for myself how the department engages with the community. Her gaze briefly swept across the auditorium before returning to him. "We appreciate your interest," Daniel replied. His mind raced with questions he dared not ask. Instead, he added, "Our students were thrilled to share their work with such a diverse audience." Isabella nodded, her expression thoughtful. "Seeing them pour their hearts out on stage reminded me of the power in words. It's one thing to read about it in a report. It's another to witness it firsthand." Daniel hesitated, then mustered the courage to continue. "Will this, tonight, factor into the board's view of our department?" She studied him for a moment, as though weighing how to answer. "I can't speak for the entire board, but personally, I find it impressive. It shows genuine community engagement, something the university claims to value." Her features softened. "Keep doing events like this." "It's exactly what we need to see. Evidence that the humanities aren't isolated within academic walls." She thanked him again, then moved gracefully past the rows of chairs, heading toward the exit. Daniel watched her depart, an uneasy blend of relief and curiosity roiling inside him. Part of him wanted to bring up the cafe incident to understand her motivations, but he refrained. Perhaps there would be a more appropriate moment in the future. He rejoined Lucy, who was already receiving congratulations from attendees. The success of the recital buoyed everyone's spirits. Still, Daniel couldn't help but notice a difference in the air after Isabella's quiet appearance. Word spread that the board president had been present, giving the event a sudden spotlight. A seed of hope took root among the faculty, but with it came a heightened sense that they were now truly under observation. From Isabella, from Doyle, from the entire board. They had shown what they could offer. All that remained was to see if it would be enough. Just 2 days after the recital, an email from Frederick Doyle hit the inboxes of key faculty members, including Daniel and Lucy. Doyle, an influential board member rumored to champion cost-cutting measures, requested an immediate meeting to discuss recent departmental activities and budgets. The tone, even through text, was cold and formal. "Looks like the big guns are out," Lucy muttered, reading it over Daniel's shoulder in his office. He frowned. He specifically mentioned the recital. "Might be a sign he's not happy we're out there showing what we can do." The meeting took place in a smaller administrative office, where Doyle sat behind a large wooden desk, flanked by 2 other board representatives. His sharp suit and polished cufflinks contrasted with the anxious tension emanating from the faculty. Dr. Bowman, Lucy, and Daniel arrived together. Jennifer and Robert were absent, having not been summoned. The atmosphere was thick, as though everyone had walked into a pre-arranged confrontation. Doyle wasted no time. "I understand you held an extracurricular event, this literary recital, drawing on university resources. Was it authorized through the proper channels?" he asked, voice smooth but edged with disapproval. Lucy cleared her throat, trying to remain poised. "We used the auditorium that was free that evening, and we covered minor costs ourselves or through small donations. The university didn't incur any extra expense." Doyle's eyes narrowed. Nonetheless, it was promoted under St. Albion's name. Public perception is that the literature department is highly active, and some might assume we're funneling substantial funds into these events. Do you have any idea how that might look while we're discussing budget constraints? Daniel felt a flash of anger at the insinuation. He spoke up, measured but firm. "Respectfully, Mr. Doyle, the whole point was to show that the literature department contributes to St. Albion's reputation. We want to demonstrate our value, not cause financial strain." Doyle's lips pressed into a thin line. "Value is something we measure in quantifiable outcomes: enrollment, graduation rates, future earnings of alumni." Emotional feel-good events, while nice, don't necessarily secure the university's bottom line. Dr. Bowman attempted a conciliatory approach, noting the cross-department collaborations underway, but Doyle seemed unmoved. He flipped through a folder on his desk, occasionally glancing at Lucy and Daniel as though sizing them up. "Let me be direct," he said. "We're still evaluating all departments. Mrs. Winters may have her own opinions, but the board makes collective decisions. You've had your time to present your proposals. If the numbers don't add up, we will cut where necessary." A hush fell over the room. Lucy's face paled, and Bowman fiddled with the edge of his notepad. Daniel locked his jaw, determined not to show fear. He realized that Doyle was an imposing figure, likely used to having people bend to his will. But Daniel also sensed a stubbornness in himself, born from years of championing literature's intrinsic worth. "I understand the need for fiscal responsibility," Daniel said carefully. "But I hope you'll also consider the long-term benefits of producing well-rounded graduates. Literature fosters critical thinking and empathy, qualities that organizations value in the workforce." Doyle gave a small, dismissive shrug. "That may be so, but soft skills won't save a financially unsustainable program. I advise you to prepare for the worst-case scenario." The meeting ended soon after, leaving Daniel, Lucy, and Bowman to step back out into the corridor. Tension crackled between them as they exchanged uncertain glances. They retreated to Bowman's office, where Lucy folded her arms tightly, looking near tears. "That was brutal," she muttered, sinking into a chair. "He barely gave us a chance to explain." Bowman massaged his temples. "Doyle holds a lot of sway. I'm hoping Mrs. Winters or other board members see the bigger picture, but he's going to push for cuts. Make no mistake." Daniel stood by the window, staring outside at the bustling campus. The conversation with Doyle had rattled him, but it also ignited a spark of resolve. He felt more certain than ever that giving in to fear would mean betraying everything he stood for. He recalled Isabella's calm support at the recital, how she'd praised the department's genuine community outreach. If Doyle represented one extreme, perhaps Isabella stood at the other, offering a lifeline, though no guarantees. As Lucy and Bowman continued discussing strategies, Daniel glanced at a framed print on Bowman's shelf, a quote by Ralph Waldo Emerson: "Do not go where the path may lead. Go instead where there is no path and leave a trail." He wondered if they had the strength to carve that trail in a university so fixated on profit. The answer, he decided, would depend not just on luck or timing, but on the unwavering dedication they brought to each new challenge. He resolved to keep fighting, no matter how discouraging Doyle's words had been. The department still had time to prove its worth before any final vote. Standing in that cramped office, he felt a subtle shift in himself, a blend of anger, hope, and determination that swelled into something like courage. Whether it would be enough to save literature at St. Albion, only time would tell, but he intended to give everything he had to the cause. A brisk autumn wind swept across the campus, rattling the half-bare branches of old elm trees. It had been 2 weeks since Frederick Doyle's tense meeting, and Daniel felt as though every day brought a fresh challenge. Despite the anxiety hanging over the literature department, a few encouraging developments lifted the faculty's spirits. They had launched a promising collaboration with the business department, an experimental course on professional communication that drew healthy enrollment from undergrads looking to sharpen their writing skills. Daniel found himself juggling more responsibilities than ever. In addition to his usual classes, he was finalizing the curriculum details for the collaborative course and working closely with Dr. Elaine Carter from business. She proved to be a steady ally, quick to offer suggestions and resources. They emailed back and forth at odd hours, refining lesson plans and scheduling guest speakers. The synergy between her business acumen and Daniel's literary perspective felt both innovative and oddly natural. Students who enrolled seemed genuinely excited, a sign that perhaps they were onto something valuable. Still, the faculty remained on edge. Lucy, pale from lack of sleep, constantly checked her email for any sign of a new board ruling. Jennifer Moore and Robert Henderson spent hours compiling alumni success stories and writing impact reports, hoping to strengthen the case that arts and humanities enriched campus life beyond revenue metrics. Daniel pitched in where he could, though he was nearly overwhelmed by the sheer volume of tasks. In the midst of this whirlwind, Isabella Winters made a quiet visit to campus. Unlike her previous formal tours, she arrived incognito, wearing a simple grey coat and plain shoes, blending almost seamlessly with the staff. She appeared in Daniel's classroom one afternoon as he wrapped up a lecture on the poetic structure of Robert Frost's works. At first, her presence startled him. He had nearly forgotten how she could slip into a space both inconspicuous and compelling. After class, he found her waiting by his desk with a small smile. "I hope you don't mind my dropping in," she said, tone polite yet warm. "I've been observing various departments, getting a feel for day-to-day interactions." Daniel set aside the stack of essays in his hands. "Not at all. I'm just surprised to see you again so soon." She glanced around at the emptying classroom. "I wanted to see the collaborative spirit for myself. Rumor has it you're spearheading a new approach with business studies." "How's that going?" Daniel explained the partnership with Dr. Carter, describing how they integrated classic rhetorical texts with modern case studies. Isabella listened intently, nodding at intervals. A flicker of interest lit her eyes when he mentioned that the class was already generating buzz among undergraduates. "You seem to have a knack for bridging literature with more practical applications," she said. "That's precisely the sort of thing the board is looking for, something that demonstrates both humanistic and real-world value." He hesitated for a moment, recalling Doyle's harsh words. "I'm trying, though I don't want to reduce literature to a mere tool. It's about shaping critical thinking, not just equipping students for the job market." "Of course," she replied, her voice low. "If I may say so, there's a delicate balance between preserving the essence of the humanities and adapting to financial realities." He exhaled, grateful to hear someone in her position acknowledge that tension. Before he could continue, her phone buzzed. She glanced down, then apologized for the interruption. "Duty calls. I'm meeting a few donors for a late lunch," she explained, stepping toward the door. "Keep me informed about the cross-department initiatives. I'll be back soon to hear more." And then she was gone, leaving Daniel to wonder how much weight her private approval held when Doyle and other board members seemed dead set on cost-cutting. Yet her quiet encouragement fueled him with a renewed sense of purpose, as if the work he and Lucy were doing had the potential to shape the university's future. He thought back to that day at the cafe, realizing how bizarrely fate had intertwined them. Outside, the sky had turned a pale, subdued grey. Daniel walked across the courtyard to Lucy's office, where she and Robert were holed up in a planning session. He relayed his conversation with Isabella. Lucy gave a hopeful nod. "Maybe she can offset Doyle's influence," Lucy suggested. "He's a bulldozer, but she's the president of the board. Ultimately, her voice might matter more." Robert tapped his pen on the desk. "We'll need to keep showing tangible results. The cross-department course, alumni feedback, maybe more public events. Everything that proves we're not just a nostalgic corner of academia." They agreed to ramp up their outreach. Lucy would continue forging partnerships with local arts organizations, while Robert handled data collection on enrollment and academic performance. Daniel Tarn, for his part, resolved to keep pushing their innovative projects forward. It was a frantic, relentless pace, but he felt a small surge of confidence. Over the next few days, he noticed subtle changes in the atmosphere. Students from other majors began dropping by literature classes, curious about the new collaborative approach. Some asked questions about advanced writing skills, while others pitched ideas for creative group projects. These small but meaningful signs suggested that the department's efforts were starting to resonate. Yet Daniel couldn't ignore the shadow of Doyle's threat looming over every new initiative. For the next week, Daniel navigated a torrent of administrative duties and classroom responsibilities. Each day felt like treading water in a fast-moving river. Late one afternoon, just as he finished a lecture on modern American poets, his phone buzzed. The caller ID surprised him. Frederick Doyle. Daniel stepped out into the hallway, pressing the phone to his ear with mounting unease. "Hello?" "Professor Thompson," Doyle said, voice crisp. "I have a proposition for you. It concerns the future of the literature department and your role in it. Let's meet privately." The proposition weighed on Daniel's mind for the rest of the day. He had no illusions about Doyle's motives. Perhaps the board member intended to bribe him into compliance or glean inside information on the department's initiatives. Still, ignoring the request seemed unwise, especially given Doyle's influence. Reluctantly, Daniel agreed to a meeting scheduled for the following evening at a quiet, upscale cafe near campus, one far different from the humble coffee shop that had sparked this entire saga. When he told Lucy about the appointment, she frowned. "Be careful," she warned, crossing her arms. "Doyle plays hardball, and we can't afford to lose you or our department's integrity." Daniel understood her concern, yet curiosity gnawed at him. What if Doyle offered a lifeline, albeit one tethered to questionable terms? The next evening, Daniel arrived at the cafe. Soothing music played over hidden speakers, and soft lamp glow illuminated polished tables. Doyle sat by the window, nursing a small cup of espresso. The board member wore a navy suit, impeccable as always, his expression unreadable. They exchanged brief pleasantries before Doyle leaned in, voice low. "I'm aware of your collaborations with other departments. Thompson, the business writing course. Potential ties with art history. Quite impressive." Daniel managed a polite nod. "We're working hard to keep literature relevant." A tight smile curved Doyle's lips. "Indeed. The board recognizes innovation, and your efforts haven't gone unnoticed. You've shown initiative that others in your department lack." His tone softened. "I have a suggestion. If you're willing to transition into a role that spans multiple departments, more administrative in nature, the university might preserve that piece of the program." Daniel stiffened, seeing the outline of what Doyle was really proposing. "You're suggesting that the literature department might still be cut, but I could be offered a position elsewhere." Doyle's gaze didn't waver. "Precisely. We can't sustain a full literature curriculum at its current capacity, not with the budget shortfalls. But you could teach a limited set of writing and analysis courses under the broader umbrella of humanities or even business communication. Think of it as a compromise. You keep a job, and the university streamlines resources." The implication was clear. Daniel's acceptance could secure his personal future while effectively dismantling the traditional literature department. He felt a flicker of anger and guilt. If he agreed, Lucy, Jennifer, Robert, and other colleagues might lose their positions. The richness of the curriculum they'd built could be reduced to a handful of practical classes. But if he refused, Doyle might push even harder to eliminate their department entirely. He swallowed, searching for the right words. "That would mean sacrificing my colleagues, wouldn't it? We've worked as a team to build a program that enriches the entire campus." Doyle shrugged. "Some sacrifices are inevitable. Don't be naive. This is a competitive environment." The board isn't interested in sentimentality. Daniel's mind flashed to images of his father's cherished novels, the nights spent reading under a dim lamp, the student recitals brimming with creativity. He pictured Lucy's tireless dedication and Rachel Stevenson's passionate poems. A hollow ache spread through his chest. Accepting Doyle's deal might solve his personal financial woes and possibly help him support his mother's bills, but it would betray the mission that drove him to teach in the first place. "How long do I have to decide?" he asked, voice tight. Doyle sipped his espresso. 2 weeks, then the board votes on departmental closures. If you're going to jump ship, better do it while you can. They parted ways without further pleasantries. Stepping out into the cool night, Daniel felt a churn of conflict in his gut. The ache in his legs from pacing the sidewalk matched the turmoil in his mind. He recalled Isabella's recent words about balance. Would she approve of such a deal? Unlikely. Yet Doyle's influence was undeniable. He found himself staring up at the stars above Manhattan's skyline, mind swirling with equal parts frustration and despair. A career pivot might preserve his livelihood, but at what cost? He realized with a sudden pang that the next 2 weeks could shape the entire course of his life and the fate of the literature department that had become an extension of his identity. Within days of Doyle's proposition, the pressure on the literature department intensified. More consultants roamed the halls, requesting data and dropping vague hints that entire programs might be consolidated. Students heard rumors and swamped Daniel and Lucy with questions about whether their majors would still exist next semester. Despite the faculty's attempts to reassure them, a persistent anxiety gripped the campus. Meanwhile, word leaked that Doyle was pushing a sweeping reorganization plan across multiple departments. Unconfirmed reports suggested that sociology, art history, and even certain science programs with lower enrollment could face severe cutbacks. The sense of dread spread beyond the humanities, forming an unlikely solidarity among professors who had once operated in separate silos. Lucy stormed into Daniel's office one afternoon, her usual calm replaced by anger. "This is worse than we thought," she said, dropping a stack of documents on his desk. Doyle's strategic consolidation plan is basically a blueprint for axing any department that doesn't generate high revenue. He's applying a spreadsheet logic to people's livelihoods. Daniel flipped through the pages. Electronic communications Lucy had gathered, rumors from staff meetings, and anxious messages from professors in other fields. "Have you seen Bowman's take on this?" he asked. Lucy nodded, exhaling sharply. "He's trying to rally support for our department, but even he's limited in what he can do. Doyle's got a strong faction behind him, and if Miss Winters doesn't intervene, we could be in real trouble." That mention of Isabella sparked a conflicting wave of hope and apprehension. Daniel remembered her encouraging words, but also recognized that she balanced multiple viewpoints on the board. Could she really stand up to someone as entrenched as Doyle? As the week continued, Daniel's personal life fell into disarray. Late one night, Susan called, frantic about their mother's health. An unexpected medical complication meant increased monthly payments for her care. Daniel reassured his sister he'd figure something out, even as a knot of dread tightened in his stomach. Doyle's offer lurked in the back of his mind, a guaranteed paycheck if he abandoned the department. The moral weight of that choice kept him awake long after midnight. His struggle was evident to those around him. After a late Thursday class, Rachel Stevenson approached him, her eyes brimming with concern. "Professor, are they really shutting down literature? I heard from a friend in the library that the board plans to turn half our building into a tech lab." He forced a wan smile. "We haven't lost yet. We're still putting together new proposals, forging partnerships." "Don't panic. She looked unconvinced. But what if we do lose? I chose my major because of teachers like you who show us why words matter. Her unwavering faith in him stung, reminding him of the responsibility he carried. "We're not giving up," he told her, wishing his voice sounded more confident. That weekend, the cross-department business writing course launched its first big project, a workshop on effective corporate storytelling. Dr. Carter and Daniel divided the class into teams, asking them to craft presentations that merged factual analysis with compelling narratives. Students buzzed with creative energy, drafting slides and scripts. The lively atmosphere bolstered Daniel's spirits. This was living proof of how a literature-based skill set could elevate communication, bridging the gap between art and commerce. Yet even as he admired the students' dedication, an email from Frederick Doyle arrived on his phone, reminding him of the impending deadline. 2 weeks had become one, and Daniel still hadn't responded to Doyle's offer. He sought a moment of solitude in the campus courtyard after the workshop. Crisp leaves rustled underfoot, and the autumn chill hinted at the coming winter. Questions looped through his mind. Could he justify sacrificing his colleagues if it meant preserving some aspects of literature education and his own job, or was that simply betrayal? He thought of Lucy, of Robert, of Jennifer, each fighting so hard for a holistic curriculum. He thought of the intangible beauty of poetry recitals and student breakthroughs, none of which showed up as pure profit. His phone buzzed again, this time a brief text from Isabella. "I'd like to meet tomorrow, 4 p.m., Campus Garden." A surprising wave of relief coursed through him. Perhaps she'd learned about Doyle's private offer. Perhaps she had some new angle. Or maybe she just sensed he needed guidance. He typed a quick reply, confirming he'd be there, then pocketed his phone. Resting a hand against a stone bench, he let the cool air center him. The promise of speaking directly with Isabella felt like a potential lifeline. Still, he had no idea what she might propose or whether she could outmaneuver Doyle's momentum. For the moment, he only knew that the obstacles standing before them all felt impossibly large, like a towering wall. Yet a spark of resolve remained, urging him to keep searching for a way around or through it. The following afternoon, Daniel found himself walking to the campus garden, a quiet spot near the old library. The place was known for its winding pathways and flower beds, though at this time of year, most blooms had faded, leaving only the sturdy greenery of shrubs and the last stubborn chrysanthemums. Isabella stood near a wooden bench, her face thoughtful as she gazed at a small fountain trickling softly at the center of the garden. "Thank you for meeting me," Daniel said softly, pausing a few steps away. She turned, offering a subdued smile. "I'm sorry for the short notice. I've been gathering data and opinions from different departments. I realize time is running short." He joined her at the bench, the afternoon sun slanting through the garden's tall hedges. A sense of private calm enveloped them, far from the bustling corridors and tense board meetings. For a moment, he recalled the day in the cafe when he first saw her in threadbare clothes, looking vulnerable. Now, she appeared composed, but weighed down by responsibility. "I assume you've heard about Doyle's reorganization plan," Daniel began cautiously. She nodded. "I have. He's been very vocal about it in board sessions. He presents it as a necessity to secure the university's financial future." "Yet you don't seem convinced," he observed. She inhaled deeply, gaze drifting to a patch of fading chrysanthemums. "I grew up in a world that revolved around money, my father's estate, corporate decisions, philanthropy. I've never been naive about finances, but I also believe a university is more than a money-making machine. The humanities, arts, and social sciences shape students in ways that pure economics can't capture." Her words resonated with him. which is why I was surprised when you showed up at the cafe. Dressed like, she let out a quiet laugh, cutting him off gently, like a woman down on her luck. Yes, I was gathering insight for a philanthropic project about homelessness and economic inequality. I wanted to experience firsthand how ordinary citizens respond to someone in need. Your kindness that day reminded me that genuine compassion still exists, and it reaffirmed my desire to protect spaces of learning and empathy. Daniel felt his chest tighten. The memory of that small but impactful exchange came rushing back, along with the strange sense of destiny that seemed to follow. "I appreciate your honesty," he managed, "and I hope you see that's what we're striving for, teaching empathy, critical thinking, and a different way of seeing the world." She offered a solemn nod. "I do see it, but the board is fractured. Doyle's group has powerful allies and plenty of data showing the financial strain. They're determined to enact sweeping cuts." His pulse quickened. "Is there anything you can do? Any compromise we can reach?" She fixed her gaze on him, eyes flickering with something akin to determination. "I'm working on an alternative budget proposal that preserves core humanities programs while streamlining certain operations. But it's risky. I'll need credible proof that your department can adapt to meet modern demands, and I need it soon." Daniel exhaled, relief and pressure mingling in his thoughts. "We're already implementing cross-department courses. Lucy's forging community partnerships. We have data on improved student engagement. Give us a chance to present all that at the next board session." Isabella tapped the bench with her fingertips. "I can arrange for a specialized hearing, but it'll be a battle. Doyle won't back down easily. He claims he's got the financial numbers on his side." Daniel squared his shoulders, feeling a surge of renewed resolve. "Then we'll show him ours. We can demonstrate how literature-based programs enhance critical thinking across majors, improve writing skills, even attract donors who value well-rounded education." She glanced at him, a note of warmth returning to her voice. "I'll do what I can behind the scenes, but you and your colleagues must be prepared. We have about a week before the final deliberations start." A hush settled between them, broken only by the gentle splash of the fountain. Daniel realized just how monumental this moment felt. Isabella was more than a mere board president. She was an ally who understood both the financial realities and the intangible worth of the humanities. For the first time in weeks, a genuine hope bloomed in his heart. He envisioned a path forward that didn't require sacrificing his values or his department. She rose, brushing an errant leaf from her coat. "Thank you, Daniel," she said quietly, "for that day in the cafe and for everything you do at St. Albion. I believe in your cause. Let's make sure we have enough evidence to sway the majority." He stood as well, offering a faint smile. "You have my word." "We won't let you down." They parted near the garden's entrance, Isabella heading off to another meeting, Daniel returning to his office with a renewed sense of mission. He quickly relayed the update to Lucy, Robert, and Jennifer, all of whom shared a wary optimism. They spent the evening drafting a plan for a final, concentrated push, a presentation that combined hard data, enrollment projections, success stories, and testimonies from local organizations eager to collaborate. Somewhere in Daniel's mind lingered the knowledge that Doyle had given him a personal escape route. Yet any lingering temptation to accept that offer now felt overshadowed by his commitment to the cause. The sense of an impending showdown with Doyle was undeniable, but he also felt a buoyant energy carrying him forward. Perhaps the department's greatest test had arrived, and he found himself, along with his unlikely ally, Isabella, ready to face it. The final week before the board's deliberation began at a frantic pace. Lucy, Jennifer, and Robert joined Daniel nearly every evening in the faculty lounge, turning the usually serene space into a command center of laptops, binders, and stacks of printed reports. They refined their materials for a decisive presentation aimed at swaying the board. Charts showed new enrollment interest in literature courses with a practical twist, while testimonials from alumni, local nonprofits, and even corporate sponsors underscored the broad appeal of well-developed reading and writing skills. At the same time, Isabella quietly slipped Daniel updates on the board's mood. Her texts arrived at odd hours, often filled with cryptic references to financial data or the opinions of other trustees. Through these snippets, Daniel gathered that the board remained deeply divided. Doyle and his faction insisted on immediate, sweeping reforms, while Isabella and a handful of moderates believed in gradual adaptation without gutting entire departments. One afternoon, Dr. Bowman called an impromptu faculty meeting. The usual anxiety was palpable among the professors who gathered in a cramped conference room. Bowman looked unusually solemn. "We've got wind of an unofficial poll among board members. Right now, it's almost even, but slightly tilting toward Doyle's plan." He cleared his throat. "If that poll remains unchanged, the literature department could be dismantled or drastically reduced." A murmur of dismay rippled through the group. Lucy spoke up, voice quavering slightly. "We're finalizing the most comprehensive presentation we've ever done. We just need a fair chance to deliver it," Jennifer chimed in, her tone urgent. "What if we invite local business leaders to that presentation, or even some of our more prominent alumni? Let them speak firsthand about the impact we've had." Bowman brightened a fraction. "That might help. The more external validation we show, the better." The atmosphere remained tense, but a resolve took shape. They ended the meeting determined to gather even more powerful endorsements. Over the next few days, faculty members contacted former students who had become journalists, entrepreneurs, or innovators in the tech sector, anyone who might publicly vouch for the value of a literature foundation. Replies trickled in, some promising to attend the board session, others sending letters of support. Meanwhile, Daniel's schedule overflowed with back-to-back commitments. He taught his regular classes, counseled worried students like Rachel Stevenson, and spent every spare moment fine-tuning slides and documents. Late one evening, as he and Lucy worked in his cramped office, the fluorescent light flickered overhead. Lucy pressed her fingers to her temples. "I'm almost afraid to hope. We've done everything we can. If the board still goes with Doyle's plan, I don't know what we'll do." Daniel paused, recalling Isabella's determination in the garden. "We haven't lost yet. As long as we keep fighting, there's a chance." Just then, a soft knock sounded on the door. It was Dr. Elaine Carter from the business department. She carried a small flash drive. "Thought I'd stop by. I've compiled data from our joint course. The pre- and post-assessments show significant improvement in writing quality and critical thinking. Might help your case." Lucy exhaled in relief, scanning the files. "This is fantastic, Elaine. Thank you for going the extra mile." Elaine offered a supportive smile. "I believe in what you're doing. The synergy between our departments is real, and I'd hate to see it cut off before it fully blossoms." After she left, Lucy turned to Daniel. "See? We're not alone in this. We're building something that extends beyond our walls." Daniel felt a surge of gratitude. The seeds of transformation, once so precarious, seemed to be sprouting in unexpected places. Business, sociology, art history, even potential donors had begun rallying behind literature, recognizing its deeper purpose. Still, as midnight approached, exhaustion weighed heavily on him. He glanced at a framed photo on his desk. An old picture of himself as a boy, sitting with his father on a worn-out porch swing, each holding a paperback novel. The memory reminded him of simpler times, when stories shaped his worldview without the intrusion of budgets and politics. A lump formed in his throat, but he swallowed it down, pushing himself to review one more set of slides before calling it a night. On the eve of the board session, Daniel stood in front of the mirror in his small apartment, knotting a modest tie. He wore a suit that had seen better days, but it was the best he had. The phone in his pocket buzzed, a message from Isabella. "Heard Doyle plans a surprise motion. Be ready. I'll do my part." His heart pounded. A surprise motion could mean anything, a last-minute budget slash or a sudden vote of no confidence in the department. He slipped the phone back into his jacket, inhaling a deep breath to steady himself. There was no time for panic. If he was going to walk into the boardroom tomorrow, he needed every ounce of clarity and courage. The culminating moment had arrived, filled with both dread and a spark of hope. He thought of Lucy's unwavering commitment, Bowman's leadership, Elaine's data, and Isabella's behind-the-scenes advocacy. This was more than just one man's fight. It was a collective endeavor to preserve the heart of education at St. Albion. Outside, city lights twinkled against the dark sky, mirroring the conflicting emotions in his chest. Tomorrow, everything they'd worked for would be put to the test. And despite the exhaustion, he sensed that every struggle so far had been preparing them for this exact moment. The seeds of transformation had been planted. The question now was whether they'd have the chance to truly take root. The early morning sun cast a pale glow across St. Albion University's campus, illuminating the old stone buildings as if trying to lend them an air of quiet majesty. Daniel arrived before most faculty, stepping into the main administrative hall with a mixture of dread and determination. Today was the critical board session, perhaps the most significant meeting of his career. In the echoing corridors, his footsteps sounded louder than usual, as if announcing his presence to the looming conflict. Lucy, already waiting in a small antechamber, looked up as he entered. She wore a conservative navy blouse and clutched a folder filled with data on the literature department's enrollments and cross-department partnerships. Her face was wan, betraying the long hours and sleepless nights that had led them here. "Good morning," she greeted quietly. "Or maybe not so good. I couldn't sleep at all." Daniel offered a faint smile, trying to steady them both. "We've done everything possible. Let's present our case and trust we can sway enough votes." They stood side by side, scanning a final set of bullet points. Lucy rechecked her printed slides, ensuring no pages were missing. Dr. Bowman soon joined them, his normally composed demeanor cracked by obvious tension. Jennifer Moore and Robert Henderson hovered nearby, exchanging hushed words of encouragement. A handful of supportive professors from other departments also gathered, reminding Daniel that they weren't fighting alone. A tall woman in a crisp suit appeared in the hallway, clipboard in hand. "The board session will start in 10 minutes, she announced, voice echoing off the marble floor. "Please make your way inside if you're scheduled to speak." Daniel's heart hammered. Lucy squeezed his arm briefly, and they filed into the stately boardroom, a space dominated by a long mahogany table and stern portraits of past university benefactors. Frederick Doyle sat near one end, perusing notes with the air of a man fully confident in his position. Several other trustees flanked him, some wearing guarded expressions, others openly nodding in Doyle's direction. Isabella Winters sat closer to the center, posture impeccable, her features calm but unyielding. At her side, a few moderate trustees listened in hushed conversation. As the meeting began, the board covered various agenda items: upcoming building renovations, scholarship funds, and departmental budget allocations. The tension in the room built palpably when discussion turned to the final bullet point: academic reorganization proposals. Doyle wasted no time. He cleared his throat and addressed the table in a resonant voice. Colleagues, it's no secret we've been evaluating the cost-effectiveness of our programs. I've compiled extensive data showing that certain departments underperform. My plan is straightforward. Realign or eliminate those that no longer serve the university's strategic or financial goals. He then launched into a PowerPoint demonstration of graphs and pivot tables, all underscoring the rising costs and diminishing enrollment in the humanities. Daniel noted how Doyle highlighted the stark numbers while glossing over recent upticks in cross-department collaborations. It was a strategic move, designed to paint the literature department as a sinkhole for funds. When Doyle finished, Isabella leaned forward. "We appreciate your thorough analysis, Mr. Doyle. However, before any vote, I believe the literature department faculty has a presentation of their own." She glanced at Daniel and Lucy. "We should hear all relevant perspectives." Doyle's eyes flickered, showing his annoyance. Still, he waved a hand. "By all means. But let's be mindful of time." Taking a steadying breath, Daniel stepped to the front alongside Lucy. They connected a laptop to the projection screen. Lucy began detailing the department's recent push toward collaborative courses, the success of the poetry recitals, and the positive feedback from alumni. Then Daniel took over, introducing the new data from Dr. Elaine Carter of the business department. The slides demonstrated a marked improvement in critical thinking and communication skills among students enrolled in their joint course. "We're seeing real, measurable benefits," Daniel explained, voice strong but laced with urgency. "Not just for literature majors, but for business, engineering, and social science students who've joined our classes. This is education that transcends traditional boundaries." At each point, he noticed Isabella's expression soften slightly, as though vindicated in her belief that the humanities still mattered. A few trustees leaned forward, examining the figures more closely, but Doyle sat rigid, fingertips tapping the table. Lucy wrapped up by highlighting testimonials from local non-profits and businesses that had partnered with literature students for community outreach. She ended on a slide showing quotes from prominent alumni who credited their literary studies with sharpening analytical acumen. Then came the moment for questions. Doyle's faction lobbed critiques, insinuating that these collaborations were too little, too late, to justify the department's expense. Others expressed interest in the synergy between literature and other fields, pressing Lucy and Daniel for more details. Frederick Doyle ultimately broke in with an impatient sigh. "We need to be practical. Even with these improvements, are we truly seeing a return on investment, or are we prolonging a failing program?" Daniel's eyes met Isabella's across the table. A hush fell as Isabella spoke. "Mr. Doyle, I respect the financial realities you've presented, but eliminating the literature department would strip the university of a foundational aspect of holistic education. Our students, and indeed our community, benefit from a well-rounded learning environment." She surveyed the board. "I propose we consider an alternative, a phased plan that integrates humanities more deeply into other curricula, supported by new partnerships." A faint murmur rose around the room. Doyle's expression hardened, but he maintained a polite facade. "We can entertain that option," he said coldly. "But in the interest of transparency, I suggest we move forward with a preliminary vote on whether to adopt my reorganization plan. If we do, the specifics can be hashed out later." Daniel's breath caught. The vote was happening sooner than he'd expected. He could feel Lucy's hand trembling at her side. Isabella's eyes were firm, yet a flicker of apprehension passed over her features. The entire department's fate now hinged on the stance of these trustees, some of whom Daniel had never met. The day of reckoning had arrived, and the next moments would reveal whether their pleas and hard work were enough to shift the tide. Chairs scraped against the polished floor as the trustees prepared to cast their preliminary votes. The atmosphere in the boardroom was electric, tension ricocheting among the assembled faces. Daniel glanced at Lucy, whose pallor betrayed her fear. Nearby, Dr. Bowman rubbed his temples, massaging away the stress. Isabella's expression was inscrutable, though a certain steely resolve emanated from her posture. Those in favor of Mr. Doyle's reorganization plan, please indicate, said the board secretary, her voice trembling slightly. One by one, hands rose. Daniel's stomach dropped as he counted them. Too many. His heartbeat thundered in his ears. Those opposed, came the next call. Another set of hands lifted, including Isabella's. The final tally was close, agonizingly close, but to Daniel's dismay, the plan passed by a slim margin. An official hush seemed to blanket the room, as though acknowledging the gravity of the outcome. Frederick Doyle offered a thin, triumphant smile. Thank you all. With this preliminary approval, we can move into the specifics of implementing departmental consolidations. We'll finalize the decision in the coming week, but I believe we've made excellent progress. Lucy squeezed Daniel's arm so hard it nearly hurt. He recognized the look of heartbreak in her eyes. Bowman, for his part, stared at the table, lips pressed in a tight line. Jennifer and Robert stood in the back, stunned, while other faculty members exchanged whispers of shock. Isabella cleared her throat. I'd like to note that the reorganization plan isn't yet fully detailed. The final vote on which departments face cuts will happen at our next and conclusive session. There's still a possibility for revisions. Doyle made a show of politeness, nodding toward her. Of course, Miss Winters, we'll consider your perspective, as well as any new data the literature department might provide. However, I advise them to be realistic. Time is short, and the financial situation is dire. The meeting adjourned with an air of finality. Daniel and Lucy drifted out into the hallway like ghosts, the weight of the news pressing down on them. Other professors offered grim condolences, some close to tears. Moments later, Dr. Bowman approached, trying to muster encouragement. Isabella's right. There's a final session next week. There's still a small window. His tone, though forced, held a vestige of hope. Maybe Ms. Winters can push for an amendment to Doyle's plan. Lucy's eyes brimmed with tears. We've thrown every number, every success story at them. What else can we do? Daniel stood silent for a moment, recalling the tension on Isabella's face. If even she couldn't halt Doyle's momentum, how could they possibly succeed? Yet a stubborn part of him refused to surrender. We regroup, he said finally. We sharpen our arguments, gather more testimonials, see if there's anyone else on the board who might be swayed. They parted ways, each carrying the burden of near-certain defeat. Back in his office, Daniel closed the door and leaned against it. His heart felt heavy as he thought of Susan's phone calls about their mother's medical bills, the scattered hopes of his students, and the uncertain job prospects he might soon face. The tiny flicker of faith that had carried him through countless late-night planning sessions now sputtered. A knock interrupted his downward spiral. He opened the door to find Isabella waiting, an apologetic grimness in her eyes. "May I come in?" she asked softly. He stepped aside, gesturing for her to enter. His office was cramped, books stacked haphazardly, remnants of a life devoted to the written word. Isabella scanned the space, her voice low. "I wanted to speak with you before leaving. I'm sorry about what happened in there." Daniel ran a hand through his hair. "I appreciate your support, but Doyle's got the votes. I don't see a clear path." She nodded, taking a seat in the spare chair. He's using the narrative of financial crisis to push his agenda. Some trustees are frightened by the numbers, and fear drives votes. A small silence passed, during which Daniel noticed the dark circles under her eyes. She had as much riding on this as he did. Her credibility as board president, her personal belief in the humanities, maybe even her own sense of integrity. "I'm calling a meeting with a few moderate trustees tomorrow," she continued. "I want them to understand the deeper impact of cutting literature. If I can rally enough support to amend Doyle's plan, we might preserve at least a core portion of your department." Daniel swallowed, a swirl of emotions threatening to overwhelm him. "Thank you, but even if we save some classes, that might still mean layoffs." Lucy, Jennifer, Robert, Isabella sighed, shoulders slumping. "I know. We might not be able to save every position, but maybe we can prevent a total shutdown." "That's better than nothing." He nodded slowly, wrestling with the moral quandary of partial victories. Even if a compromise spared some courses, cherished colleagues would be left out. "It feels like I'm choosing between a partial betrayal and total annihilation," he muttered bitterly. Isabella stood, adjusting her coat. "It's the reality of crisis management, Daniel. Do what you can to protect what matters most." "I promise to fight for every inch." She left soon after, footsteps echoing down the hallway. Alone, Daniel sank into his chair, haunted by the near defeat etched into the day's events. He picked up a paperback of Walt Whitman's poetry, flipping aimlessly through the pages. His gaze landed on a line, "Keep your face always toward the sunshine, and shadows will fall behind you." The words stirred a faint spark in him. Perhaps hope could still guide them, if only they dared to keep going. But the foundation of his academic world had been shaken, and the final battle loomed, demanding more courage and more sacrifice than ever before. Over the next several days, a tense lull settled over the campus. It felt like the hush before a thunderstorm, the air thick with anticipation. The final board session was set for Friday, giving Daniel and the others precious little time to regroup. Rumors surfaced that Doyle was lobbying certain trustees behind closed doors, promising them budgetary leniencies in exchange for supporting his plan. At the same time, Isabella met with moderates, attempting to craft an amendment that would shield core humanities programs, including literature. Lucy and Daniel buried themselves in further outreach. They penned letters to prominent cultural institutions in Manhattan, soliciting endorsements, and they convinced a small roster of successful alumni, now novelists, media executives, and public policy experts, to sign a petition calling for the preservation of literature education. Each new signature offered a flicker of hope, yet Daniel couldn't help noticing Lucy's exhausted eyes and anxious fidgeting. Their entire department felt like a family awaiting dire news in a hospital corridor. One late afternoon, Daniel strolled through the campus courtyard, where a group of students had gathered around Rachel Stevenson. She held a copy of her poetry chapbook, reading aloud under the fading golden light. A handful of classmates listened intently, some with notebooks, others merely soaking in her words. Daniel's chest constricted with a mix of pride and sorrow. These impromptu gatherings were precisely what made the literature department so vital, an unforced community of shared imagination and ideas. When Rachel finished, the small audience clapped quietly, a subdued reflection of the campus mood. Spotting Daniel, she trotted over. "Professor Thompson, do you think we'll still have advanced poetry workshops next semester?" she asked, voice tinged with fear. He hesitated, forcing a gentle smile. "We're doing our best to ensure it, Rachel. Just keep writing. Don't lose that spark, no matter what happens." Her eyes flickered with uncertainty, but she nodded, clutching her chapbook as if it were a talisman. Daniel walked away, haunted by the possibility that these passionate young voices could be silenced by a cold, cost-analysis decision. Later that evening, he met Lucy, Jennifer, and Robert at a local diner for a quick meal. The talk was subdued, each of them grappling with the reality that even in a best-case scenario, they might lose colleagues, courses, or entire programs. Yet Lucy tried to inject a note of positivity. If the board accepts an amended plan, maybe we can rebuild from there. Think of it as a setback, not a complete end. Robert stirred his coffee. I just hope we don't lose the heart of our curriculum. Academic integrity matters. Jennifer's expression was sober. You know, I've started applying to positions at other universities. I don't want to leave, but we have to be practical. We all have bills to pay. A pang shot through Daniel. He recalled the quiet proposal Doyle had made him weeks earlier, offering a chance at personal survival if he abandoned the department. He still hadn't told Lucy or the others about that. The moral weight of secrecy pressed heavily on his conscience. He pushed the thought aside, not wanting to add more turmoil to an already tense gathering. At the end of their meal, Lucy suggested they stop by campus briefly to finalize some last-minute documents for the next day's presentation. I'd rather not scramble in the morning, she said, mustering a weary smile. They returned to their offices, the halls eerily empty. As they crossed a hallway near the administrative wing, Daniel spied a light under the door of a small conference room. Inside, he glimpsed Doyle conferring with two other men in suits, their voices muffled but urgent. Lucy tugged Daniel's sleeve, motioning for him to keep moving. They did, but Daniel's mind reeled with possibilities. Was Doyle tightening the noose, or had Isabella's behind-the-scenes lobbying forced him to revise his tactics? In Daniel's office, they worked for an hour, double-checking slides and verifying the alumni petition had been sent to every trustee's inbox. Lucy's eyelids drooped as she scrolled through email threads. "I'll make one more pass at editing," she murmured. "Then I'm calling it a night. My brain's fried." After she left, Daniel lingered alone, gazing at the row of classic novels on his shelf. Dickens, Morrison, Austen, Baldwin, reminders of his lifelong love of words. He recalled childhood moments with his father, feeling a profound sense of loss at the thought that these stories might no longer have a formal home at St. Albion. His phone buzzed with a text from Isabella. "Tomorrow's crucial. Keep your evidence sharp and your convictions strong. I'll fight for the amendment." A wave of gratitude washed over him. She was still fighting, even if the odds were stacked against them. Slipping his phone into his pocket, Daniel exhaled deeply and flicked off the office lights. Stepping into the hallway, he felt that familiar mixture of apprehension and quiet resolve. By this time tomorrow, they would know if their department would endure in some form or be dismantled altogether. He left the building, the night sky heavy with an impending storm. Tomorrow promised no easy answers, but for now he savored the fleeting stillness, hoping it might fortify him for the battle ahead. Friday dawned with a bitter wind slicing through campus, sweeping fallen leaves across the cobblestones. The final board session was scheduled for late morning, giving Daniel and Lucy a few last hours to polish their arguments. They convened in the literature department lounge with Jennifer, Robert, and Dr. Bowman, flipping through color-printed slides and scanning the final endorsement letters they'd received overnight. Bowman moved between them, offering quiet words of reassurance. "Think of this as our culminating performance," he said, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. "If we show them the depth of our conviction and the breadth of our support, perhaps we can tip enough votes to push for the amendment." Lucy swallowed hard. "I'm ready," she said, though her voice quavered. "Let's do this." At 10:30, they filed into the same stately boardroom where the preliminary vote had crushed their spirits just days before. This time, the seating arrangement was more formal. Trustees at the long table, faculty and guests in chairs lined against the walls. Daniel noticed a handful of local community leaders, alumni, and even a couple of business owners who had collaborated with the department. Their presence boosted his morale. At least they had a small cheering section. Frederick Doyle presided at the head of the table, looking crisp in a charcoal suit. Isabella was seated to his right, an island of composure, but Daniel caught the subtle tension in her posture. After some initial formalities, Doyle cleared his throat. "We've gathered to finalize the reorganization plan. However, Ms. Winters has requested we first hear an alternative proposal." Isabella nodded, signaling Lucy and Daniel to begin. They stood in front of a modest screen, hooking up their laptop. Lucy spoke succinctly about the new data on cross-department enrollments, pointing out that interest in literature-infused courses had risen by 15% since the pilot programs began. Daniel followed up with testimonies from local businesses and non-profits, each praising the innovative projects led by lit majors. A sense of momentum built in the room. Bowed heads lifted in interest. Some trustees scribbled notes. At one point, a bearded alumnus in a sharp blazer rose from the back row to voice his support, recounting how studying classic literature had shaped his ethical decision-making in the corporate sphere. Applause followed. Daniel's chest felt tight with cautious optimism, but Doyle was not to be outdone. When the floor opened for questions, he pressed them on hard numbers, exact revenue projections, cost-benefit analyses, administrative overhead. Some trustees nodded along with Doyle's probing, indicating they remained fixated on financial viability. "We understand the intangible benefits," Doyle conceded, his voice smooth. "But let's be clear. The university's primary resource is money. We can't fund small classes indefinitely if they're not pulling their weight." Isabella stepped in, her tone firm. "We're not asking to shield the literature department from accountability, Mr. Doyle. The faculty has demonstrated an ability to attract enrollment and integrate with other fields. The question is whether we invest time to let these initiatives grow, rather than discarding them prematurely." An impassioned discussion erupted among the trustees, with some leaning toward Doyle's cost-centric stance, while others, swayed by Isabella's argument, recognized the department's potential. The atmosphere crackled with debate. Daniel watched the back and forth, adrenaline pumping. Their entire effort hinged on whether enough board members would align with Isabella's more measured approach. Finally, one trustee cleared her throat, requesting a structured vote. Doyle frowned, but he complied, calling for the board to consider Amendment 2, Isabella's proposal to retain the literature department in a scaled format, giving it 3 years to prove continued growth and adaptability. "Should that amendment fail," Doyle added, "we will proceed with my original reorganization plan." Daniel felt Lucy's hand brush his arm as they stood off to the side. Her eyes brimmed with hope, fear, and exhaustion. He returned a steady look, wishing he could offer more than silent reassurance. Trustees began whispering among themselves. Some shot glances at Isabella, others at Doyle. One by one, they cast their votes, yes or no, to Isabella's amendment. Tallying the responses fell to the board secretary, whose pen moved methodically across a sheet of paper. Daniel's heart thundered in his ears. Even Bowman seemed to hold his breath. With all votes in, the secretary paused, double-checking the tally, then read the final count. A hush descended, broken only by the shuffling of papers. Daniel felt a rush of cold dread before her voice rang out clearly, announcing that Amendment 2 had passed, but by the narrowest of margins. Applause rippled through the back rows, where faculty and supporters sat. Isabella exhaled, relief flashing across her face. Doyle, lips tight, nodded curtly. He maintained his composure, though the frustration in his eyes was plain. "All right," he said, voice measured. "Then we proceed with this amended plan. The literature department has a 3-year probation to meet performance benchmarks." Lucy gripped Daniel's arm in a surge of joy, tears threatening to spill. Bowman wiped his brow, sagging with visible relief. The deed was done. They hadn't won absolute freedom, but they had secured a fighting chance. As the board moved on to finalize the meeting minutes, Daniel realized they'd reached a pivotal victory. Yet a nagging awareness crept in. This was only a partial triumph. The next steps would be equally demanding, if not more so. But for now, they had beaten back the immediate threat, preserving the heart of their program from Doyle's axe. In the moments following the board's vote, the tension in the room gave way to a muted sense of celebration among those who had fought to save the literature department. Faculty members exchanged relieved smiles, and a few shook hands with trustees who voted in favor of Isabella's amendment. Even some of the newly converted trustees offered polite nods, acknowledging the passion that Daniel, Lucy, and the rest had brought to their presentations. Frederick Doyle, keeping his air of professionalism, announced that the official documents outlining the amendment would be circulated soon. "I trust the literature department will take this probationary period seriously," he said, voice taut. "We expect measurable progress every semester." Daniel forced himself to nod respectfully. "We understand, Mr. Doyle. Thank you for giving us an opportunity." Despite his gratitude, he couldn't ignore the chill in Doyle's eyes, a silent promise that any misstep could reignite the threat of closure. Nevertheless, the immediate crisis was over. Once the meeting adjourned, Lucy nearly collapsed into a chair in the hallway. "Oh my gosh, I can't believe it," she murmured, one hand pressed to her forehead. "We actually did it." Jennifer and Robert joined them, faces flushed with relief. Bowman arrived as well, though he maintained a more measured demeanor. "We have plenty of work ahead," he noted, but his eyes sparkled with renewed energy. "We'll need to implement improvements quickly to satisfy the board's conditions. But at least we have a path now." Amid the subdued elation, Isabella appeared, stepping away from a small group of trustees. She approached Daniel, wearing a slight smile that reached her eyes. "Congratulations," she said softly, extending a hand. "You and your colleagues showed extraordinary resolve." He shook her hand, the warmth of her palm a comforting contrast to the formal surroundings. "We couldn't have done it without your support," he replied, voice low. "That vote was closer than I'd like to admit." She glanced around, ensuring no one was eavesdropping. "It was. A few trustees only decided this morning, after hearing about the widespread endorsements you'd gathered. I also suspect they see the merit in forging cross-department programs that reflect modern educational needs." A faint relief flickered across her features. "I'm glad we managed to avert the worst outcome." Lucy, Jennifer, and Robert took turns thanking Isabella for her efforts behind the scenes. Isabella graciously accepted their thanks, then excused herself to finalize administrative details with the board secretary. As she left, Daniel couldn't help recalling the moment he'd first met her in that bustling cafe, how her eyes had revealed traces of a hidden life. Now she'd used her influence to safeguard an entire academic program. Life's twists, he thought, were astonishing. The euphoria carried them through the rest of the day. Word spread quickly across campus, prompting congratulatory messages, supportive emails, and relieved sighs from students who feared their literature classes would vanish. Rachel Stevenson actually burst into tears when Lucy explained the department was saved, at least for now. "I'm so happy," the young woman said, wiping her cheeks with the edge of her scarf. "I was making backup plans to transfer if they cut the program." That evening, Daniel found himself at a local pub with Lucy, Jennifer, Robert, and a handful of other professors, raising modest toasts to their survival. The ambience was light, albeit tinged with exhaustion. They laughed about the roller coaster ride of the past few weeks, sharing stories of late-night brainstorming and frantic calls for endorsements. Mid-conversation, Lucy turned to Daniel, lowering her voice. "You look different." She studied his face thoughtfully. "I don't know. More at peace, maybe." He paused, realizing he did feel a strange tranquility beneath the lingering adrenaline. "I guess I've learned that standing up for what you believe in can bring a kind of calm," he said, shrugging, "even if the struggle isn't over." A round of cheers erupted at a nearby table as a group of newly hired adjuncts celebrated the news that the cuts wouldn't eliminate all their positions. Daniel's gaze drifted to the window, where nighttime lights sparkled across the city skyline. A small voice inside reminded him that Doyle's threat wasn't gone forever, merely delayed. The department had a 3-year probation, after all, and that time could pass faster than anyone imagined. After the impromptu gathering ended, Daniel stepped outside into the crisp night air. He strolled to a quiet spot under a street lamp and took out his phone. For a moment, he debated sending Isabella a quick text, just to express his gratitude again. But before he could type, a new message from her arrived. "I'm relieved for you and your colleagues. Let's talk soon about next steps. There's still much to do." He typed back, "Thank you, truly. I'm ready to work on a sustainable plan. Let me know how I can help." Pocketing his phone, he headed toward the subway station, mind wandering through the future's uncertainties. The department's victory came with strings attached. They had to increase enrollment and prove financial stability. That meant forging deeper partnerships, hosting more public events, and ensuring the curriculum appealed to a broad range of students. It also meant navigating potential friction from Doyle and his allies, who likely viewed this compromise as a temporary setback. Yet, against the looming shadows of those challenges, Daniel felt a quiet sense of triumph. They had turned the tide in a single, decisive vote, preserving literature at St. Albion for the time being. The moment brought him a hard-won relief. He'd fought side by side with people he respected, uncovered new dimensions of leadership in himself, and realized that even the darkest hours could yield a glimmer of hope. Standing on the subway platform, he hugged his satchel close, reflecting on the swirling events that began with a simple act of kindness in a cafe. Everything had changed since that day. His convictions, his alliances, perhaps even his perspective on life. As the train roared into the station, he stepped aboard, grateful for the reprieve won, and determined to shepherd his department into a brighter, if uncertain, future. A week after the board's decisive vote, the hallways of St. Albion University felt subtly different. Though the threat of closure had lifted, life in the literature department remained colored by caution. Faculty were relieved, but they also walked with the awareness that a 3-year probation loomed, requiring hard evidence of growth and innovation. Daniel noticed this atmosphere each morning, passing bulletin boards plastered with announcements for new collaborative courses and public reading events. The sense of possibility mingled with a collective sigh of relief. Students still approached him with questions about future classes, but now, instead of despair, their voices held cautious excitement. He reassured them the department was forging ahead. Late one afternoon, Lucy burst into his office, breathless and carrying an armful of papers. "Have you seen the new enrollment figures for next semester?" she asked, a sparkle in her eyes. "They're up across the board for literature electives, 25% more than this time last year." Daniel's spirits lifted. "That's fantastic," he replied, scanning the pages she handed over. "It means the changes we've made are drawing more interest." "Students must be intrigued by the cross-department approach," Lucy nodded. "I think so. We should keep highlighting real-world applications, show that studying novels and poetry doesn't mean being disconnected from everything else." A quick knock on the open door turned their attention to Dr. Bowman. He stepped in, adjusting his glasses. "I wanted you both to know that Miss Winters has scheduled a progress check for next month. Not an official board vote, just a short meeting where we can share updates on enrollment and partnerships." Daniel felt a little jolt at the mention of Isabella. She'd been busy these past days, meeting donors and drafting policy proposals for the university. Though they exchanged the occasional text about departmental matters, they hadn't spoken face-to-face since the board session. "We'll be ready," Lucy said. "It's nice to have a chance to show we're actually meeting expectations rather than waiting around for doomsday again." Bowman offered a reassuring nod. "Keep up the momentum. If these numbers hold, we'll be in a much stronger position by the end of the semester." That evening, after the campus had mostly cleared, Daniel decided to walk home instead of taking the bus. Manhattan streets glowed with neon signs and the hum of traffic. His mind wandered to Isabella. He found himself wondering how she was faring under the pressure of balancing financial concerns with her personal convictions. Their brief interactions had revealed a thoughtful, empathetic side to her, but also a pragmatic streak forged by years of corporate and philanthropic work. He recalled the first time he'd seen her in that cafe, how taken aback he'd been to learn of her true identity. Even now, the memory evoked a quiet admiration for the lengths she went to understand society's struggles, but an undercurrent of uncertainty pulled at him. Their dynamic was unspoken yet palpable, crossing professional lines. He wondered if it made sense to reach out more personally, or if any step in that direction risked fueling university gossip. The next day, however, Isabella reached out herself. A short text invited him to meet for coffee at a discreet spot near campus, just to talk about next steps, she wrote. When he arrived, she was already seated at a small table in the corner, dressed in a simple blouse and blazer. Far from the opulence one might expect of a millionaire, her expression lit up when she saw him. "Daniel, thanks for coming," she said, rising to greet him. There was a gentle warmth in her eyes that caught him off guard. He sat across from her, and they ordered drinks, black coffee for him, herbal tea for her. The cafe was only half full, the chatter of other patrons creating a soft hum of background noise. "I wanted to hear your thoughts on how best to keep the department thriving during this probation," she began. "I see the enrollment stats, and they look good. But if we're going to remain competitive, we might need to strengthen external partnerships, maybe a small literary conference or a cultural festival on campus." Daniel tapped his fingers against the table, mind already sparking with ideas. A conference could draw attention from publishers, scholars, and local libraries. Our students could host panels, maybe do poster sessions on cross-disciplinary research. "It'd show that we're not isolated in an ivory tower," she nodded, clearly pleased. "Exactly. We can't just talk about synergy, we have to demonstrate it. I'd like to see a formal proposal soon. Pitch it to me, and I'll do my best to secure partial funding from philanthropic channels or the board's discretionary budget." As they talked, the conversation gradually shifted from official plans to a more personal register. He asked about her philanthropic pursuits, and she opened up about how traveling incognito to observe social inequalities had broadened her perspective. "That experience taught me that real kindness often comes from people with the least to give," she said softly. "Your gesture that day reminded me why I need to stay grounded, even in a role with so much power." Her words tugged at his heart, stirring feelings he tried to keep in check. He recalled the wave of compassion that swept over him when he first saw her distressed at the cafe, how natural it felt to help a stranger in need, not knowing she could likely buy the entire building if she chose. The memory laid bare the empathy they shared. Though they came from vastly different worlds, they parted with a renewed sense of purpose, promising to meet again soon to finalize plans for the proposed conference. But Daniel walked away from that meeting feeling the weight of possibilities pressing against him, both professional and personal. The department's future seemed brighter, but shadows still lingered, from the threat of board scrutiny to the subtle, unspoken connection between him and Isabella. In the weeks that followed, Daniel and Isabella continued shaping the idea of a literary conference. Lucy teamed up with Jennifer and Robert to gather potential guest speakers, local authors, editors, and academics who could lead workshops. Funding proposals were drawn up, combed through, and revised. Isabella even hinted at a possible collaboration with a well-known literary foundation that could sponsor part of the event. Encouragement spread among the faculty. Flyers for the future conference, tentatively named Bridging Words and Worlds, began appearing around campus, sporting an elegant design featuring an open book morphing into a city skyline. Students pitched in with excitement, volunteering to help run panels and manage social media outreach. For the first time in ages, the department felt energized rather than merely defensive. But just as momentum soared, a subtle shift in campus gossip arose. Daniel first noticed it when a junior professor from another department greeted him with a pointed smile in the staff lounge. "Hey there, Romeo," the professor teased under his breath, raising eyebrows knowingly. At the time, Daniel brushed it off as a strange remark, yet over the following days, he found more and more colleagues giving him sidelong looks, as though they had discovered a secret about him. Late one afternoon, Lucy cornered Daniel in the corridor. "Something weird is going on," she murmured. "Have you heard what some people are saying about you and Miss Winters?" Daniel's stomach tensed. "What do you mean?" She let out a frustrated sigh. "Rumors circulating that you and she are, well, romantically involved. Some folks claim that's why the board spared our department. They're saying you used personal influence to sway Isabella." He froze, a surge of heat and embarrassment rushing to his cheeks. "That's absurd. She's been supportive because she values the humanities, not because of—" He paused, unable to complete the sentence without confronting the hints of personal connection that did exist. Lucy gave him a sympathetic look. "I know it's not true, but rumors latch onto any shred of possibility. People saw you two talking after the board meeting, and you've met with her privately multiple times. They're making assumptions." Daniel rubbed his forehead, recalling how discreet they'd tried to be. "This could be bad," he muttered. "If the board thinks there's any impropriety, it could undermine Isabella's position and the legitimacy of the department's survival." Lucy nodded. "Exactly. We're on probation as it is. We can't afford a scandal, and you can't risk your own reputation." A knot of dread settled in Daniel's gut. The idea that his genuine professional collaboration and the unspoken emotional undercurrent might be twisted into a salacious rumor felt like a violation. He recalled how gossip had eroded his own marriage years ago, when neighbors whispered about the financial strain that eventually split him and Melissa. The last thing he wanted was more destructive chatter. That evening, he drafted a calm yet detailed email to Lucy, Bowman, and a few key faculty allies, suggesting they adopt a transparent communication strategy. "Let's emphasize that every decision regarding our department was backed by measurable data, endorsements, and legitimate board procedures," he wrote. "We'll highlight the official reasons for our probation's success." He paused before sending it, his mind drifting to Isabella. She needed to know about this rumor too, but reaching out to her felt loaded. Discussing gossip about them might itself feed the speculation. Eventually, he decided honesty was best. He sent her a succinct text. "Need to talk about a problematic rumor on campus. Could we meet?" Her reply came within the hour. "Yes, late tomorrow afternoon. My office at the executive suite, 5:30 p.m. The next day dragged. Daniel found it hard to concentrate in class, plagued by worry that each student's passing look carried silent judgment. By 5:30, he knocked on the door of Isabella's executive office, a glass-walled space overlooking a manicured courtyard. She ushered him in with a businesslike nod, her eyes betraying concern. "I've heard the rumor," she began without preamble. "Frederick Doyle apparently confronted me indirectly, hinting that I've compromised my position on the board. He didn't accuse me outright, but the insinuation was clear." Daniel sank into a chair, a hollow sensation expanding in his chest. "Lucy says it's spreading fast among the faculty, too." Isabella set aside a stack of documents on her desk. "We need to address it. Our best move is transparency, show we have nothing to hide. But I also don't want to feed the chatter." He pressed his lips together, struggling to find the right words. He sensed how precarious the situation was. If they publicly denied everything too forcefully, some would interpret that as proof they were indeed hiding something. Yet if they ignored it, the rumor might grow. "We have to clarify the professional basis of our collaboration," he said finally. "Point to the data, the committees, the official votes." She nodded, gaze distant. "We'll craft a statement, if necessary. For now, let's stay focused on the conference and keep our personal interactions cautious." They briefly reviewed the action plan, resend updates to the board, highlight the external sponsors, and keep a polite but measured distance in public. The undercurrent of tension hung between them, impossible to ignore. As Daniel left, he felt a swirl of apprehension. The rumor threatened not only his career, but also the fragile bond forming between them, one they'd neither fully acknowledged nor denied. As the rumor spread, Daniel found himself navigating an emotional minefield. Students from his classes approached him with genuine curiosity, some asking bluntly, "Are you and the board president dating?" He would bristle, trying to keep composure, reminding them the university's survival hinged on facts, not innuendo. Lucy, determined to protect him, launched into a series of departmental updates that publicly credited a wide range of supporters: alumni, philanthropic organizations, even other board members besides Isabella. "If we show that many people contributed to our probation success," she reasoned, "it'll chip away at the narrative that everything hinged on a personal connection." Meanwhile, Bowman convened a private meeting with Daniel and Isabella to strategize a formal response to Doyle's veiled accusations. They decided not to issue an official statement unless pressed, but they prepared bullet points explaining the department's growth metrics, the philanthropic pitch Isabella made to donors, and the thorough board procedures. If forced, they'd present these facts calmly. Within this swirl of damage control, Daniel noticed his heart felt heavier each time he saw Isabella. Their interactions were polite, carefully measured, no longer marked by the candid openness they'd shared when the stakes were simpler. Fear of fueling the rumor had driven a wedge between them. He couldn't help feeling a pang of loss, as though an unspoken promise of closeness was slipping away. One afternoon, Rachel Stevenson caught Daniel after class, offering him a homemade cupcake decorated with the word "thank you" in icing. "You've been a mentor to me, Professor Thompson," she said earnestly. "I heard the gossip, but I don't believe it. And even if it were true, you're the best teacher I've had. People should be grateful you saved the program instead of spreading rumors." Her unwavering support moved him. He recalled how just a short while ago she'd been the anxious student fearing the department's closure. Now, she'd become a pillar of loyalty. "Thank you, Rachel," he replied quietly. "That means more than you know. Sometimes the rumors overshadow the real work we do here." She handed him the cupcake and hurried off, leaving him with a bittersweet smile. The moment reminded him that, for all the adversity, he had made a real impact on students' lives. On the administrative front, time marched toward the upcoming Bridging Words and Worlds literary conference. Lucy and Jennifer confirmed panelists. Robert secured a modest catering budget, and Dr. Carter from the business department arranged a special workshop on writing for social media. The synergy among faculties felt like a small triumph, an embodiment of everything Daniel and his colleagues had argued for at the board meetings. But as the conference drew nearer, Frederick Doyle made an unexpected move. He requested a private inspection of the conference budget, citing concerns about potential conflicts of interest. Word reached Daniel that Doyle specifically questioned the funds Isabella had promised to raise. The insinuation was clear. If money from her personal networks poured into the department, was that another sign of favoritism? When Lucy relayed the news, Daniel felt the familiar knot of anxiety tighten. "He's not letting go, is he?" he muttered, massaging the back of his neck. She shook her head. "Not a chance. He wants to find a crack in our armor. If he can prove or even suggest unethical behavior, it'll sabotage the conference and maybe your entire probationary period." The possibility weighed heavily on Daniel, who remembered Doyle's earlier ultimatum to jump ship. He wondered if Doyle's renewed push stemmed partly from a personal grudge over Daniel's refusal to abandon the department. Days later, Daniel summoned his courage and approached Isabella directly outside a late afternoon donor reception. The hallway was quiet, echoing with faint applause from inside the event. She looked elegant in a tailored black dress, but her expression seemed pensive. "Doyle wants a financial audit of the conference," Daniel said, voice low. "He's implying you might be funneling personal resources into it to keep me and the department afloat." She glanced down, her brow furrowing. "I figured he'd do something like that. Let him. Everything we've done is above board. The donations come from legitimate philanthropic entities, and we have records to prove it." He swallowed, searching her gaze. "I hate that it's come to this. It undermines all the genuine good we're trying to do." A flicker of sorrow crossed her face. "Believe me, Daniel, I feel the same. But sometimes doing the right thing means navigating these storms." Their eyes locked for a moment, a silent acknowledgement of an unspoken bond. Before either could say more, the door to the donor reception opened and a small group spilled into the hallway. Isabella offered Daniel a polite nod, then turned to greet the guests with her professional composure firmly in place. He left with mixed emotions: gratitude for her unwavering stance, frustration at the rumor's persistence, and a deep yearning for a simpler connection, free of prying eyes. Whatever might come next, it was clear that the final test of their integrity, and perhaps the department's survival, would be tied to how they handled Doyle's scrutiny. The literary conference they'd pinned so many hopes on now felt like a double-edged sword, a chance to shine or a trap set by those seeking any excuse to cast them aside. A brisk January morning dawned on the day of the Bridging Words and Worlds literary conference. Students and faculty buzzed around the main hall, adjusting tablecloths, hanging banners, and testing microphones. Daniel arrived early, carrying a few last-minute copies of panel schedules. He took a moment to absorb the sight: clusters of eager attendees, local authors unpacking books to sell, and bright-eyed undergraduates checking name tags. It was a scene he once feared would never materialize, given all the threats of closure. Lucy waved him over to a welcome desk. She wore a wide grin, albeit tinted with nervous energy. "We have about 200 registered participants," she said, "not counting walk-ins." "That's huge for our first conference." Daniel glanced at the sign-in sheets, heart swelling with pride. "It's more than I hoped for, a testament to all your hard work." Behind them, Robert bustled by with a box of lanyards, while Jennifer directed a volunteer to rearrange chairs for the first panel. Excitement merged with a sense of relief. No matter what happened next, They'd proven their department could host an event of real substance and broad appeal. The opening session began in a small auditorium. Dr. Bowman welcomed the crowd, highlighting how the conference was a symbol of St. Albion's commitment to interdisciplinary dialogue. Next, Daniel took the podium to introduce the day's format: panels on writing for digital platforms, discussions on literature's role in social justice, and collaborative sessions with the business department on persuasive communication. He scanned the audience, spotting a few trustees sitting with politely reserved expressions. Doyle was there, arms folded, face unreadable. Isabella sat further back, surrounded by a mix of donors and fellow board members. Their eyes met briefly, and she offered a nod of encouragement. Throughout the morning, panels ran smoothly, with lively Q&A segments. Attendees tweeted praises, tagging the university's social media handles. A local news blogger strolled around, snapping photos and interviewing students. Daniel at Lucy and the other organizers juggled 100 small tasks, ensuring each speaker had water, rearranging seating for overflow crowds, and managing unexpected schedule hiccups. At midday, a keynote speaker took the stage, a best-selling novelist who'd once studied at St. Albion. He spoke movingly about how the literature department nurtured his love for storytelling. "Back then, no one judged me for dreaming," he said, voice catching slightly. "My professors believed in the power of words to connect and heal. I wouldn't be here without them." When he concluded, the audience burst into applause. Daniel felt tears prick the corners of his eyes, gratitude for a moment of validation after months of doubt. He slipped backstage, taking a minute to breathe. That's when Isabella found him, stepping through a side curtain. "This is spectacular," she said, her face lit with genuine pride. "The turnout, the energy, it's exactly what we wanted to show the board." Daniel couldn't contain a relieved laugh. "I just hope Doyle sees it that way. He's been lurking around, taking notes, but I can't read his expression." Her brows furrowed. "He already asked me about the donor breakdown. I showed him the itemized list, every cent accounted for. I think he's running out of angles to discredit the conference." They stood in quiet camaraderie for a moment, the echoes of applause drifting through the curtains. Daniel recalled the rumors swirling around them, the precarious line they walked. "You know," he said softly, "I don't regret anything that led us here. Even if half the campus gossips about us, what matters is we saved the department. And if there's more to us, we'll handle that eventually." Isabella's posture relaxed, her eyes reflecting a mix of relief and warmth. "Sometimes it takes a storm to see who stands strong by your side. I'm grateful for your integrity, Daniel." Before either could add more, Lucy poked her head through the curtain, apologetically announcing that the next panel was about to start and people were looking for Daniel. Isabella offered him a final, meaningful glance. He took a steadying breath and stepped back into the spotlight, resuming his role as conference host. The afternoon sessions carried on with the same electric energy. Even Frederick Doyle appeared to soften, nodding occasionally during a talk on literary analysis in digital journalism. By day's end, the foyer filled with animated discussions, attendees exchanging contact info and praising the event's organization. Local authors sold a surprising number of books. The visiting trustees mingled with a new appreciation for what the literature department could accomplish when given a chance. As the last panel wrapped up, Lucy, Jennifer, Robert, and Daniel gathered in the main hall, exhausted but glowing. Students continued to linger, drawn in by the communal spirit. Dr. Bowman joined them, shaking hands with an animated gratitude. "Congratulations, everyone," he said, voice resonating with pride. "This is exactly the sort of success story we needed." A short distance away, Isabella conversed with a pair of donors, but her eyes flicked to Daniel, conveying a shared acknowledgement. They had proven not just the department's worth, but the integrity of their collaboration. A hush of emotion welled in him, reflecting on the uphill climb they'd endured. They had weathered rumors, budget threats, and endless scrutiny. They stood on the other side, battered but victorious. Though he knew the probationary period still stretched ahead, full of tasks and challenges, he felt unshakable confidence that the literature department wouldn't just survive, it would flourish. He saw it in Lucy's unwavering smile, in Robert's triumphant posture, and in the keen light of determination in Isabella's gaze. With these shared commitments, they had carved a place for words and stories to thrive in a world that often neglected them. As the crowd thinned and the conference wound down, Daniel found himself standing near the main doors, watching the last of the guests drift away into the winter twilight. Above, the sky bore soft shades of lavender and gold, a gentle promise of new beginnings. He inhaled, letting the crisp air ground him. In that quiet instant, the complexities of the past months washed over him. The kindness to a stranger, the tough board battles, the blossoming sense of partnership with a woman whose intentions ran deeper than anyone guessed. He stepped back inside, ready to help clean up and gather materials. The day had ended with a profound sense of fulfillment, a testament to how compassion, determination, and mutual respect could overcome even the fiercest obstacles. Whatever rumors lingered, whatever future tests awaited, Daniel believed they had found a truth stronger than any lie, a story that spoke of hope, integrity, and the enduring power of empathy in a place that needed it more than ever. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.